Hey, wide awake family. If you see this, it's your sign to smash that like button. Yes, you listening right now. That way YouTube shows you more amazing stories like this one. We love you all. Now enjoy the stories.
I didn't really plan on telling anyone about this because it sounds like something I made up, like one of those stories you toss around in a group chat just to get a reaction. But this actually happened, and it still pops into my head whenever I walk past that stupid cafe. The whole thing started on a Tuesday afternoon when I matched with Amira. Her profile looked normal enough, nothing wild, just photos of her at parks and some blurry pic of her eating noodles. I figured she seemed chill, and I wasn't doing anything, so I asked if she wanted to hang out. She said she was already heading to my side of town and we could meet at the little cafe next to the bus stop. I didn't think much of it. I'd been to that place a bunch anyway. I got there early and grabbed some random seat near the corner. The place had that usual buzz, people tapping on laptops, someone stirring their drink like they were mixing a potion, and that sugary smell from the pastries they always kept in the glass case. I sat scrolling through my phone, trying not to look too bored. When Amaral walked in, she had this calm energy, like she knew exactly how everything was going to go. Not confident in a flashy way, just steady. She sat across from me, and we talked about the usual stuff people go through on first dates. School, work, what we do when we're bored. All that filler. It felt normal, which I guess is why I didn't notice anything weird at first. She had a small notebook with her, one of those plain ones people use for journaling. I figured she just liked taking notes for school or something. Halfway through talking about our fave snacks, she casually opened the notebook, not showing it to me yet, just glancing down like she was checking something. She didn't say anything, just ran her finger down a page. Then, without looking up, she slid it across the table toward me. No build-up, no explanation. Right there on the page was a list, like a proper list, all handwritten, neat lines, exact dates, and even little drawings of the tables in that cafe. I didn't understand it for a second. I thought maybe it was some kind of sketchbook. But then I noticed the notes next to each drawing. Things like table by the window or left corner seat or third table from the counter. And then more stuff, like the time of day. At the top of the list, she had written in tiny letters, places he sat. I stared at it thinking maybe this was some kind of joke, but she didn't seem like she was joking. She just kept sipping her drink like she was waiting for my reaction. She told me super casually that she'd been charting my choices. Those were her exact words. She said she had read this pattern in me way before we matched. She said she'd seen me in the cafe a lot more times than I'd probably noticed. I sat there trying to think back, checking my memory, wondering if I had ever noticed her in the background. I couldn't place her anywhere. I even tried to live through the moments, like ruining everything in my head, but nothing. She pointed out that I always sat near walls, never in the middle. She pointed out that I switched between two specific corners depending on whether it was morning or afternoon. She explained the little symbols she had drawn, like circles for times I was alone and squares for the times I had earphones in. She had even written down the drinks he ordered based on what she could see when she walked by. She had notes like iced matcha afternoon looks tired and hot maca rain day buddy. I honestly didn't know what to say. I just stared at her handwriting, which was weirdly perfect, like every letter was the same size. She said she wanted to match with me for months, but didn't want to until she felt she understood the way I moved around the world. She said watching where someone chooses to sit tells her everything she needs to know about how they think. The way she talked about it made it sound like some kind of science project. Not in a creepy loud way, but in this calm, certain way that made me feel like I was already inside some experiment I didn't sign up for. She said she didn't mean it in a strange way. She just liked collecting patterns. She said she noticed the way I always glanced at the menu even though I ordered the same thing, and the way I tapped my foot under the table on days when it was crowded. I looked around thinking maybe someone else was seeing this and finding it weird, but everyone around us was in their own bubble. The world didn't shift or anything dramatic like that. It was just me, her, and that list of my entire cafe history staring back at me. The more I flipped through the pages, the more I realized she wasn't lying. She had pages from last winter, pages from the early part of the year when school stress was frying my brain, and even pages from random weekdays I barely read living through. She knew more about my coffee habits than I did. She even marked a day where I had spilled a bit of my drink because I was rushing to get to a bus. I didn't even remember spilling anything until she mentioned it, and then it all came back. Instead of freaking out, I just sat there trying to process how someone could put that much effort into someone they hadn't even matched with yet. She didn't seem embarrassed or proud, just matter of fact about it. Like to her, this was totally normal. She said it helped her feel like she already knew me before she said hi. I didn't stay long after that. I told her I had to head out, and she nodded like she already expected it. She closed her notebook and tucked it away like she was saving the next chapter for later. When I left the cafe, everything felt like it had been flipped inside out. I kept thinking about all the times I sat there, half asleep or bored, or scrolling through my phone, completely unaware someone was building this whole quiet little archive about me. I still pass that cafe sometimes, but I don't go in as much anymore. Every time I walk by, I catch myself wondering if she's somewhere nearby adding another note about where I stood or how fast I walked. It doesn't freak me out exactly, but it sticks in my head in this weird, heavy way. I'm just going to start this the way the whole thing felt. Kind of messy, kind of random, and definitely not something I expected to end up thinking about for weeks afterward. The whole situation didn't roll in with some dramatic vibe or a weird hint that something was off. It just sort of drifted in like the way you forget you left your headphones in your pocket and find them later all tangled up. That's the best way I can explain how meeting Abdul felt at first. I wasn't looking for anything wild. I wasn't hoping for some giant moment. I was honestly just scrolling while half eating cereal and avoiding the stuff I was supposed to get done. Then his profile popped up. His pics looked normal. Not like those stage ones with perfect lighting, just regular shots like a dude who didn't care too much about how he looked online. That made him seem real, which is probably why I swiped. I didn't overthink it. He messaged me first, saying he was free later that day and we could meet somewhere simple. He suggested a small tea shop tucked between a laundromat and some place that sold phone cases for $5 each. I didn't mind. It sounded like the kind of spot where nobody expects anything fancy, and I was in the mood for anything complicated. It was warm that afternoon, the kind of warmth that doesn't hit you like heat, but just sits around you like a blanket someone tossed over your shoulders without asking. I walked to the place, checking my reflection in the windows I passed just to make sure my hair wasn't doing something chaotic. When I got there, he was already sitting at a table outside. He waved at me like he already knew me, which I figured was just him being friendly. Once I sat down, I noticed he kept shifting in his seat, not in a twitchy way, more like he was trying to find the exact right angle. I didn't get it at first, so I just kept talking about classes, random stuff online, things like that. But the longer we sat, the more I realized he was copying me. If I leaned back, he leaned back. If I rested my arm on the table, he did the same. If I crossed my ankle over the other, he followed. I thought maybe it was just one of those coincidences where two people move the same without noticing, like how yawns spread in a room. But then he did it again, and again, and he went out his way to adjust his chair every time I made the slightest move. I wasn't sure what to think, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe he had some habit of matching people because it made him feel more comfortable. The street was busy enough that I could focus on cars passing by if the moment got too weird. People were going in and out of the laundromat carrying baskets stacked high enough that I kept thinking someone was going to drop socks all over the sidewalk. It gave me something to glance at whenever I felt like I needed a second to reboot my thoughts. At one point, I leaned forward to grab my drink and noticed his eyes flick down to my hands first, then to my legs, then to my shoulders. He adjusted his whole position in tiny shifts, almost precise, like he was making sure everything lined up. It wasn't smooth or instinctive. It was intentional. I kept trying to play it cool, acting like I didn't notice, but it was impossible to ignore after a while. I tried leaning back a little faster, and he hesitated for a second like he had to calculate it before doing the same. That's when he finally looked kind of proud, like he nailed some silent test. That weird moment stuck with me more than anything else. After a while, he mentioned the grocery store. He didn't drop it in a way that made sense to the conversation. He just said it like I already knew what he meant. He said something about how he had gotten really good at matching my movements. He talked about watching how I grabbed things from shelves, the way I stood while comparing prices, the way I held my basket. He kept saying he wanted to mirror the rhythm of me. That's when it hit me. He wasn't guessing this stuff. He had actually seen me in the store before. That wasn't too weird on its own, since it was the one near where I live and everyone went there eventually. But then he said it. He said he had videos. Not videos he found online. Videos he took. He said he recorded them because he thought I moved in this really structured way and he wanted to practice copying it. He told me he took the clips from across aisles so I wouldn't notice. I tried to play the moment out again in my head, but last time I was in that store. I remembered grabbing cereal, checking the price on that giant bag of chips that cost around $6, stopping for a minute because I forgot what else I was supposed to buy. I didn't remember seeing him anywhere, but maybe he wasn't close. I sat there letting the information sit in my head like a bucket filling with water. I didn't react right away, partly because I didn't know how. He wasn't acting guilty or nervous. He wasn't waiting for some dramatic response. He just said it like it was totally normal, like people record strangers to study how they walk all the time. I kept thinking about which aisle he might have been in, if he was behind some stand of chips, or if he was pretending to look at cereal when he wasn't. I imagined him watching me through his phone screen while I reached for something on a high shelf. The whole idea dove its way into my mind in a way that wouldn't leave. I tilted my head to the side just to see what he'd do. I didn't even do it on purpose at first. It was more like a reflex. He noticed instantly. He tilted his head too. Not perfectly, but close enough that it was obvious. It was like I was controlling him without meaning to. That should have been funny, but it wasn't. It was heavy and strange and made my skin feel too tight. We sat there for a while longer, and he kept mirroring me like it was some built-in habit he couldn't turn off. I tried to keep my body still so he wouldn't have anything to copy, and that made the air between us feel even more stiff. The whole time, he seemed content, like everything was going exactly the way he expected. I couldn't figure out how he thought any of this was normal. After a bit, I told him I needed to head home. I didn't give a reason. I just said it as calmly as I could. He nodded instantly, like he'd been waiting for me to be the one to end the moment so he could match that too. I felt weird walking away without looking back, but I didn't want to see if he tried to copy the way I walked too. When I got home, I kept thinking about those videos. The aisles, the shelves, the weird bright lights buzzing overhead. I tried to remember if I ever felt like someone was behind me too long, or if I ever paused and sensed something off. But I didn't. I must have been just in my own world like usual, thinking about nothing important while someone watched me through their phone screen and tried to move like me. Sometimes when I'm at the grocery store now, I catch myself glancing around corners without meaning to. Not because I think he's there, but because the thought lingers in the back of my head. It's small, it's steady, like a tap on the shoulder from a memory that doesn't want to fade yet. The whole thing started on a weird kind of morning, the type where you wake up earlier than you wanted for no reason and your room feels too quiet, like the air's holding its breath. I grabbed my phone mostly just to give my brain something to latch onto, and that's when I saw the match with Semi. Her profile looked simple, nothing dramatic. A couple pictures with her friends, one of her sitting on some stone steps, and another where she stood by a fountain wearing sunglasses that probably cost more than I wanted to know. She looked normal in a way that didn't make me suspicious, which is basically the only reason I messaged her. She replied fast, like she'd been waiting on her phone already, and suggested meeting in the park near the old library. I didn't mind. It wasn't far from where I live, and the park always had people around, which made dates feel less like interviews. I got dressed, grabbed a drink, and headed out. The sky was bright but not too sunny, a kind of perfect drop in temperature where no jacket is needed, but wearing one wouldn't make you look weird either. I walked through the park gate and saw her standing near the path. At first, I didn't notice the stroller beside her. I was more focused on making sure I didn't look like I'd rushed to get there even though I definitely had. When I got close enough, she smiled and waved. The stroller was right next to her, one of those fancy ones with a big canopy and wheels that looked like they were designed for some marathon parent who runs 5 miles every morning. I figured she was babysitting for a relative or something, which honestly made her seem kind of responsible. But then I noticed the stroller was completely silent. No shifting, no tiny kid noises, not even a blanket hanging out. She moved it closer toward us casually, and that's when I glanced inside. It was empty. Not even a toy or a bottle or anything. Just empty. I didn't say anything because I didn't want to assume the wrong thing. Maybe she used it to carry stuff. People do that sometimes, right? I tried to stay relaxed as we started walking down the path. She pushed the stroller like there was actually a baby in it, stopping it gently, checking it casually, the whole routine. I kept trying to figure out how to bring it up without sounding rude. Before I could, she told me she brought it on purpose. She said it calmly, like she was explaining why she picked a certain pair of shoes. She talked about how she had always imagined what her future kid's name would be. I thought she was just rambling or joking, maybe filling silence. But she didn't stop there. She said she had chosen the name based on my face. My face. I wasn't even fully sure I heard her right. She said something about facial structure and how certain shapes gave certain energies, and she had already decided the name fit perfectly. She didn't tell me the name, which somehow made the whole thing even stranger. It was like she had this secret blueprint she wasn't ready to show me yet. We walked past this bench where two older guys were arguing about pigeons, and it grounded me enough to pretend everything was still normal. But she kept talking like she'd been studying me for way longer than our match existed. She said she had her reading my posts, old ones too, the ones everyone forgets they even wrote. She said she had pieced things together, imagining what kind of parent I'd be, and that the stroller was sort of a preview. The word stuck in my head, a preview, like she was showing me a trailer for a non-existent future. I didn't want to freak out right away, so I asked questions in the safest way I could, like how she picked the stroller, why she brought it today, stuff like that. She said she wanted to see how I reacted to the idea of responsibility. She said people show who they really are in small reactions more than in big moments. She said she could tell everything she needed to know about someone by how they walked beside a stroller. I didn't know what that meant, but she seemed absolutely sure of it. We kept walking and she started steering the stroller in front of her like it was precious cargo. I tried not to pay attention, but it was impossible not to. The park was full of families, joggers, kids on scooters, and here we were, a guy and a girl on a first date with an empty stroller like it was the third member of our conversation. There was a moment where a woman passing by smiled at us like we were new parents. It wasn't even a big smile, just a polite one. But Semi's face lit up like it confirmed something she'd been wanting. She didn't say anything about it, but she didn't have to. It was written all over her expression. We ended up sitting on the grass near the pond. She parked the stroller next to her and tilted the canopy slightly, like protecting something inside from the sun. She sat cross-legged and started telling me more about how she imagined things going years from now. Not months. Years. She spoke like she had a timeline, and I was supposed to be aware of it. She said she could already picture little habits I would have as a dad, based on how I stood, how I talked, how I reacted to unexpected things. I didn't know how to respond to that. It wasn't like she asked my opinion. It wasn't like she paused long enough for me to say anything meaningful anyway. She wasn't nervous or joking or even intense. She was just certain, completely certain about something she couldn't possibly know. At one point, she leaned back on her hands and said the stroller made her feel prepared. She said the world made more sense when she imagined the next step before it happened. She said matching with me felt like the last piece she had been waiting for. I started getting that heavy in the stomach feeling where you're not scared exactly, but your brain starts putting warning signs around the edges of everything. I kept glancing at the stroller like it would suddenly make sense if I stared long enough, but it never did. It was still just an empty stroller sitting beside us like some kind of symbol she never explained fully. After a while, I told her I had to get home. I didn't lie about anything big. I just said I had stuff to take care of. She nodded slowly like she'd been expecting it. She didn't act disappointed or surprised. She just stood up, brushed the grass off her jeans, and grabbed the stroller handles again. As we headed back toward the park entrance, she kept pushing it with the same careful rhythm. People kept giving us those small glances parents usually get, and every time she had this quiet content look on her face. Like she had already decided this was step one of something she saw way before I did. When we reached the sidewalk, she said she'd talk to me later, and then she pushed the stroller down the path like she had a whole route planned already. Watching her walk away with it made everything feel even more surreal, because it wasn't until that moment that the whole thing truly hit me. She brought that stroller not for attention, not for a joke, not even for a quirky story. She brought it because she had already built a future in her head and plugged me into it. And she wasn't checking if I liked the idea. She was checking if I fit.
Hey guys, really sorry to interrupt. If you're still listening, then you're enjoying the story so far. And if you are enjoying, then please hit that like button. That's all I ask of you. Thanks so much. Now back to the stories.
I'm not even sure how to set this story up without sounding like I'm already halfway exhausted just thinking about it, because that's exactly the mood I was in when the whole thing happened. I'd had this long week where everything felt slightly off, Like my days kept missing the mark by an inch. You know when your phone charger breaks, your shoes get soaked in a puddle you didn't see, and your brain just feels out of sync for no real reason. That was me. So when I matched with Talmud, I wasn't expecting anything, not even a decent distraction. I just swiped because I was bored on my couch, staring at the ceiling like it owed me answers. His profile gave off a super casual vibe. Nothing polished, no stage pictures, just some shots of him sitting by a food truck, one of him on a city bench, and another where he was leaning against a railing somewhere near the river. He had this expression that looked like he was always halfway judging something, but in a quiet way. I figured he was just one of those people who didn't smile in photos. Fine by me. He messaged saying he liked simple first dates and asked if I wanted to meet at this outdoor food spot behind the stadium. It wasn't too far from where I live, and the place always had people hanging around even if they weren't buying anything. I figured it was safe enough and said sure. I got ready slower than usual, not rushing, more like drifting through the motions until I eventually stepped outside. The evening was strange in a good way. The sky had that faded light right before it starts getting dark, where everything feels like it's waiting. The kind of air that makes you want to walk a little slower for no reason. When I got to the food area, the smell of fried stuff hit me instantly. Fries, sizzling meat, whatever sauce people always spill on themselves. Kids were running around, teens were leaning on railings pretending they were too cool to be there, and strangers wandered around holding food with one hand and their phones with the other. It actually felt chill. I spotted him standing near a table, but he wasn't sitting. Not leaning, not even touching the chair, just standing in front of it like he was guarding it. He noticed me and gave a small nod, but he didn't move toward the chair at all. I figured maybe he was waiting for his food, so I walked over. He didn't sit. He didn't even look at the chair. It was like the seat didn't exist for him unless I interacted with it first. I laughed a little, assuming he was just being polite or something. You know how some people wait for their date to sit first because they think it looks respectful. I thought it was that, so I sat. Literally the second, I lowered myself into the chair, he sat down like he had been tethered to me with a string. Zero hesitation. Exact timing. It startled me for a moment because it didn't feel like coincidence. It felt practiced. We started talking and he was normal in conversation. Surprisingly normal. He asked about random stuff, like music classes, food, and whether I liked the stadium area. His voice was even, steady, calm. But every time I leaned forward or adjusted how I was sitting, he stayed perfectly still. Too still, like he didn't want to react until something very specific happened. I tested it a little. I shifted slowly, just crossing my legs or uncrossing them, and he didn't move at all. Not an inch. His eyes didn't even flick down. He just watched my face. It wasn't creepy exactly, more like he was observing something with purpose. I grabbed my drink, set it down, wiped my hands on my jeans. All the normal stuff you do when you're bored or nervous. Still nothing from him. He sat like a statue until I placed both my hands flat on the table. The moment I did, he leaned back slightly. Not random. Not delayed. Precise. Almost rehearsed. That's when he finally said it, in this calm, matter-of-fact voice. He mentioned how he didn't want to sit before I did because he was measuring how long it takes me to claim territory. He didn't say it like a joke. Not like something he thought would make me laugh. He said it like someone reading instructions off a card. My brain took a second to catch up. Territory. Me? Claim. It sounded like the kind of thing someone says when they've been thinking way too deep about something that wasn't deep at all. I thought maybe he meant he was checking how long I took to pick a side of the table, or how fast I settled in, or maybe he was just weirdly philosophical. But no, he meant it. He explained, without even blinking, that he liked watching how people choose spaces. He said the moment between arriving and sitting tells him everything about a person. Stuff like confidence, hesitation, instinct, whatever. He talked about it like it was a science he spent years studying. He said he wanted to see if I'd sit fast or slow, if I'd hesitate, if I'd check the chair first, if I'd try to stand while talking. According to him, that delay said something important. The whole thing felt like I had stepped into a test I never agreed to take. As he talked, he kept his posture perfectly aligned with mine. If I leaned slightly right, he matched it within seconds. If I sat up straighter, he mirrored it. It wasn't playful mimicry. It was intentional. Focused. He kept scanning the way I interacted with my space like he was gathering data. He didn't touch his drink for a long time, and when he finally did, it was only after watching me hold mine for a few seconds first. It felt like the world around us was carrying on normally, voices, footsteps, laughter. But our table was stuck in this bubble where everything I did mattered way more than it should. At one point, I decided to see what would happen if I stood up. I didn't do it dramatically, just casually, like I needed to stretch. The moment I pushed my chair back, his eyes sharpened. He didn't stand. He watched, almost too carefully. I walked a few steps away to toss a napkin into the trash, and the entire time he stayed seated like he was restraining himself, like standing without my signal would ruin some experiment he was running in his head. When I came back and sat down, he exhaled like he'd been holding his breath through the whole moment. Then he sat forward again, mirroring me instantly. It clicked in my head then, he wasn't analyzing the world. He was analyzing me, and not in a casual way. And I've already built a formula, and you're the missing variable kind of way. We talked a little more, mostly him watching, mostly me trying to pretend I wasn't aware of how weird everything felt. The whole time, he kept adjusting his distance to match mine exactly. If I leaned closer by even an inch, he leaned the same amount. It was so precise that it started feeling like we were locked in some invisible grid. Eventually, I told him I needed to go. Not dramatically, just plainly. I stood up, and this time he finally stood too, but only after watching the exact moment my feet were fully planted. He didn't reach out, didn't ask follow-up questions, didn't seem confused. He just nodded like he collected all the information he wanted. As I walked away, I didn't look back. I didn't have to. The moment I stepped off that concrete path, it felt like his invisible measuring tool stopped scanning me. Like the test was over and I'd never know my score. The weirdest part, the whole time, he seemed absolutely certain he was doing something normal. Like everyone measured territory. Like everyone ran silent experiments on people they just met. Like sitting second was some universal rule he followed religiously. Sometimes when I'm out now, choosing a seat feels different. Not in a paranoid way, just in this strange, what would he have marked down way? It sticks with me more than I wanted to. I'll be honest, the only reason I even went on this Tinder date was because I was in one of those moods where everything felt too slow. The kind of day where you keep opening the fridge, even though you already know what's inside, and you keep checking your phone even though nobody's texting you. I wasn't looking for anything exciting. I wasn't even looking for someone interesting. I just wanted to do something that didn't involve staring at my ceiling. So when I matched with Samira, I didn't really think much past, oh right, whatever, maybe it'll be decent. Her pictures made her seem normal enough. Just a couple selfies in good lighting, one photo with her friends, one random photo of her next to a bookstore sign that had some joke on it. Nothing that screamed weird energy. Nothing that warned me ahead of time. So when she suggested meeting at this quiet coffee place tucked behind a hardware shop, I figured it was fine. I'd been there before anyway. It had this low hum of a vibe, the kind where people stayed for hours either studying or pretending to study while actually staring out the window. The weather was kind of in between that day. Not sunny, not raining, just this dull light across everything like the sky didn't feel like deciding on a mood. I walked there without rushing, kicking at random leaves on the ground because it gave me something to do with my feet. When I got inside, she was already at one of the tables near the back. She waved at me with a small smile, the kind that wasn't shy or excited, just there. She looked a little more polished in real life than in her photos. Her hair was perfect in a way mine never is unless I spend too long fixing it. She had this calm expression, like she wasn't nervous at all. Most first dates come with that weird little cloud of awkwardness floating around, but she sat like she'd already been here for a while and settled into the environment. I sat across from her and we started talking about regular things at first. Work, school, the usual filler stuff. She asked me questions like she genuinely wanted answers, not in that fake polite way some people do. For a minute, the whole thing actually felt normal. She didn't mirror my movements or analyze where I sat or carry anything strange. It was probably the most typical start to any date I'd been on in a long time. But then, out of absolutely nowhere, she reached into her bag and pulled out a printed sheet of paper. She placed it on the table gently, like it was something important. At first, I thought it was homework or a flyer or something she forgot to put away. But she pushed it toward me with this controlled little motion, waiting for me to look at it. It was an application, a rental application. A rental application with my name on it. Not handwritten, not editable, not blank, typed. fully typed. Both are names. Both are details. Mine spelled correctly. Address line already filled. Cosigner box marked. I didn't even understand what I was looking at first. My brain refused to process it for a second. It felt like someone had ripped a page out of a movie script and dropped it in front of me. She watched me the entire time, totally calm. Not nervous. Not embarrassed. Not amused. Just steady, like she was waiting for me to catch up to something she already decided. She told me she had submitted it earlier that morning. Submitted. Not drafted. Not half-filled. Submitted. She said it as simply as someone saying they bought a new pair of socks. She explained that the place was across town near this bakery she liked, and it had good lighting and decent rent. She mentioned the price casually, something like $950 a month for a one-bedroom, which she remembered correctly, and how it was rare to get something that cheap in that neighborhood. She said she acted fast because she didn't want to lose it. I sat there without touching the paper for a good few seconds because I couldn't trust myself not to react weirdly. My mind raced through every possible explanation like it was flipping through channels. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe she filled out the form without submitting it. Maybe she just wanted to see my reaction, but her face said otherwise. She wasn't joking. She wasn't playing. She genuinely meant everything she'd done. I finally picked up the paper, and seeing my name typed cleanly next to hers made my stomach drop a little. I hadn't told her my full name like that. Not the way it was written here. I'd only given her the casual version people use in conversation. But on the form, it was the official version. The one I used on legal stuff. The one not on my profile. She noticed my confusion and explained, completely casually, that she found my full name from a tag on an old post I forgot even existed. She said she cross-checked it to make sure she didn't mix me up with someone else. She talked about it like she was proud of her thoroughness. I skimmed down the paper again, and that's when I noticed the signature line. She hadn't forged my signature or anything like that, but she circled the spot where I was supposed to sign later. The pen marks were thin and controlled, a perfect little loop around the empty line. Then she pulled out another paper. A printed email confirmation. The landlord had replied already. She showed me the email like it was proof of something good she'd done. My name was right there again, typed next to hers. She had told the landlord we were looking to move in as soon as possible, and that she'd get my part of the paperwork finished soon. I couldn't even form a sentence for a full moment. My brain just stalled out completely. She kept talking, explaining how she picked the location based on my commute, which she somehow pieced together from the times I usually posted and the bus routes near my area. She said she thought through everything before matching with me. She said she didn't want to waste time dating people who didn't fit her plan. She said she felt like she already knew this was the right choice. The right choice for what? A lease? A future? A whole life? I didn't understand her logic, and the more she talked, the more it felt like she'd been several steps ahead of me since before we even met. The strangest part was how calm she was. Her voice didn't shake. Her hands didn't fidget. She didn't test my reactions. She didn't watch me with analyzing eyes. She simply acted like this was the natural progression of two people getting to know each other. Eventually, I told her I needed to leave. Not because I had somewhere to be, but because my brain felt too crowded with questions. She didn't protest. She didn't get upset. She didn't even seem confused. She just said she'd update me as soon as she heard back about the next steps in the rental process. As if we were in this together. As if I agreed. As if a lease was the same thing as grabbing coffee. I left the cafe with the papers still burned into my mind. I didn't take them with me, but they stayed there anyway, like a shadow behind my thoughts. Walking home felt heavier somehow, like the air around me shifted. I kept replaying the moment she slid those documents across the table, like she'd been waiting for that exact second. Now, whenever I pass a rental sign taped to a window, I get this weird reminder of that date. Not fear, not panic, just this strange, uneasy hum that settles under my skin. Because someone out there once planned my next step before I even knew there was a step to take. Ready for the next one with Abu. I always tell myself I'm done with first dates for a while, and then somehow I end up on another one like I didn't just promise myself the exact opposite a week earlier. This time, it wasn't boredom or curiosity or anything dramatic. It was more like one of those afternoons where you've been scrolling way too long, your eyes hurt, your brain won't quiet down, and you match with someone just to feel like you're doing something that isn't scrolling. That's how Abu ended up on my radar. Not fate, not excitement. Just me trying to break up the dullness of my day. His profile looked pretty standard at first glance. A few pictures that didn't look staged, one with him holding a skateboard, another where he was at a night market, and one of him sitting on a curb with a drink next to him. Nothing flashy. Nothing suspicious. His bio was short too, which honestly felt refreshing. Most people overshare or throw quotes in there that make me roll my eyes, but he didn't. He just wrote that he liked simple hangouts and good food. That was it. We started talking about places near us that weren't too crowded, and he suggested this diner tucked between a thrift store and a tiny used bookshop. I'd been there a couple times, mostly because the food was cheap and the servers didn't hover. Plus, the place had these big windows that made it feel open even when it was full. I didn't mind the idea of going somewhere familiar, especially on a day when my brain was dragging behind me like a heavy backpack. When I got to the diner, the sign above the door was flickering a little, like it was trying its best but losing energy. I opened the door and stepped inside. The usual smell of pancakes, grease, and syrup hit me immediately. It wasn't fancy, but it was warm. Abu was already sitting in a booth near the window. He had his hands folded on the table, sitting with his upright posture that reminded me of someone waiting for an interview. He waved me over, and I slid into the seat across from him. He smiled, but not too wide, like he didn't want to seem overly eager. Everything about him felt controlled, not stiff, but definitely deliberate. We started talking casually, nothing intense. He asked about my week, and I told him about school, random errands, the usual stuff. He told me about his job and how he liked working flexible hours. At first, everything felt completely normal. Then I noticed the tapping. The first time it happened, I didn't think anything of it. I said something about how the thrift store next door always had weirdly oversized jackets, and he tapped the table twice. Just 2 soft taps with 2 fingers. I barely registered it. People tap all the time. Nervous habit. Bored habit, who knows? Then I said something else about how I accidentally bought cereal I didn't even like because I wasn't paying attention, and he did it again. 2 taps. Same rhythm, same spot on the table. Not too loud, not too quiet. Just enough to be noticeable if you were paying attention. I tried to keep the conversation flowing and ignore it, but the pattern started getting too obvious. Every time I talked, tap, tap. Not when he talked. Not when the server came by. Not when other people made noise. Only when I opened my mouth. I forced myself not to get distracted and kept talking, trying to act natural. But my eyes kept drifting to his hand. His fingers hovered lightly above the table, like they were on standby waiting for me to speak again. The second I started another sentence, tap, tap. After maybe 5 minutes of this, my brain started running laps trying to figure out what he was doing. Was it a tuck? Was he timing something? Was he nervous? Was he counting something? It didn't feel random. The taps were too precise, too intentionally paired with my words. I shifted in my seat, leaned back a little, and he didn't react. He just kept listening, nodding at the right moments. But the second I said another full sentence, tap, tap. It got weird enough that I started testing it. I said a chunky sentence on purpose, paused for a minute, and said a super short one. Both got the same tap, tap. I even tried saying one word just to see if he'd do it. He did. That's when he finally acknowledged it without me asking. He didn't look embarrassed or apologetic. He didn't try to hide it. He just said it calmly, like he was explaining why he liked a certain flavor of ice cream. He told me he was counting my potential for long-term compliance. It hit me like someone dropped a brick into my brain. Compliance. Not effort. Not patience. Not compatibility. Compliance. He didn't say it in a creepy whisper or a dramatic way. He said it neutrally, like it was a normal thing to say on a first date. Like everyone had a little mental scale in their head measuring people around them. He said he tapped the table every time I spoke so he could track consistencies. Track. Not understand. Not appreciate. Track. I sat there trying not to visibly react. The diner was still full of its usual noises, pans clattering in the kitchen, someone laughing too loud at the counter, a kid whining about wanting pancakes. Everything around me was normal, but the moment felt anything but normal. He kept explaining, completely unfazed. He said people reveal patterns in their speech. He said some people talk in bursts, some in spirals, some in straight lines. He said he could tell by the speed, wording, and flow of what I said how likely I was to follow structure. Structure. Another word that didn't belong on a date. He talked about it like he'd been studying this stuff on purpose. Like counting my speech rhythm gave him insight into how I behave in a big picture sense. I didn't know whether to laugh or get up and leave. I felt like I had accidentally stepped into some experiment he'd been waiting to run. I tried to shift the conversation back to something normal. I asked about his hobbies, where he grew up, random things like that. He answered all of them calmly, but the tapping kept happening. Every time I spoke, he tapped twice. Not once. Not 3 times. Exactly twice. It felt like he was marking moments, as if my words were points on some invisible graph only he could see. At one point, I dropped my fork by accident, and when I bent down to pick it up, I caught his hand above the table, hovering again, waiting. It didn't move until I started speaking again. Tap, tap. It felt like the whole booth had turned into some kind of silent test chamber. Me in one seat, him in the other, and the table between us acting like a pulse tracker. Eventually, I asked if he always did this with people. He said not everyone. Only people he saw potential in. He said he didn't like wasting energy. He said most people revealed too quickly that they couldn't hold structure. I didn't ask if I was passing. I didn't want to know. I told him I needed to head out, something about having things to finish at home. He didn't look offended or even surprised. He nodded once neatly, like he had expected that moment to arrive right then. He didn't ask to walk me out. He didn't ask when we talk again. He simply watched me stand up and gave one final tap-tap when I said goodbye. As I walked out of the diner, the air outside felt cooler than when I went in, colder against my skin in a way that made me feel like I'd been inside a room someone forgot to warm. I didn't look back at the window where he sat. I didn't want to see if he was still tapping even when I wasn't there. Weeks later, I went to that diner again with friends, and the moment I sat down at a booth, my brain replayed the sound, tap, tap. Even now, sometimes when I talk too much in one go, I half expect someone across from me to start marking down invisible notes. It's strange how a tiny sound can stick with you. Before I get into what happened with Aisha, I should probably explain the headspace I was in that day, because it wasn't the kind of mood that makes you cautious or sharp or even a little suspicious. It was one of those lazy afternoons where everything feels slightly unreal, like you're half awake but still drifting. I finished all the things I was supposed to do earlier than expected, and suddenly I had all this extra time with nothing to fill it. My phone was right there, so obviously I started scrolling on Tinder, which is basically the same thing as inviting trouble at this point. I matched with Aisha during that half zoned out state. Her profile wasn't anything flashy, just a few relaxed pictures of her sitting outside cafes, one photo in a hoodie, one photo with a cat, and one where she was in front of a mural. Nothing about her looked chaotic or dramatic or intense. If anything, she had the exact opposite vibe. Calm, controlled, someone who probably used planners and actually followed them. That kind of energy. She messaged me first, asking if I wanted to meet for something quick since she was already out and didn't want to go home yet. I didn't think twice about agreeing because it wasn't far from where I live, and I had nothing else to do anyway. We chose this frozen yogurt place in the strip mall near the bus stop, the one where all the flavors taste vaguely the same, but everyone pretends they can tell the difference. The place was mostly empty when I walked in, just 2 kids arguing over toppings and a bored worker wiping down the counter. The overhead lights buzzed softly in that way that gives places like that a weird sterile feeling. Aisha was sitting at one of the little plastic tables near the frozen toppings bar, scrolling on her phone. She looked up when she saw me and gave a small wave. Her smile was easy, relaxed. She didn't look like someone who was about to drop something strange on me. She didn't even have that awkward first date stiffness. She just seemed like a normal person out for a casual dessert. We talked about basic, light things while we mixed our froyo. She picked something that looked like vanilla mixed with mango, topped with those weird popping boba everyone either loves or hates. I grabbed something chocolatey because I didn't feel like experimenting. The conversation felt fine at first. Normal questions, normal energy, nothing even remotely hinting at what was coming. We sat down at the table again, and that's when she reached into her tote bag and pulled out her phone. Placing it face down in front of her, she was about to show me something important but not serious. I figured it was a picture of her cat or a meme. Something harmless. Then she unlocked it, opened a document, and turned the screen toward me. It was a spreadsheet. Not a simple one either. It wasn't one column or a little list. It was a full multi-tab sheet with labels, color coding, tiny notes, and dates. There were names along the left side, 10 of them. 10 people she had dated before. Each row had categories: communication frequency, reaction times, mood stability, humor consistency, future potential, emotional unpredictability, personal goals, interpersonal friction, compatibility rating, and an extra column at the end labeled expiration estimate. My name was on it, at the very bottom, freshly typed. The moment I recognized my own name, my brain pretty much did a full reboot. I stared at it for a few seconds, waiting for her to start laughing or say it was some dumb joke or some class project she got carried away with. But she didn't look embarrassed. She didn't look amused. She didn't look like anything out of the ordinary was happening. She just watched me, waiting for my reaction like she was showing me a recipe she wanted me to try. I scrolled through the sheet, and my stomach dropped a little when I saw that the first column next to my name was already filled in. I don't even know when she would have had time to gather that information, because we had barely spoken before this. But she had already plugged in things like communication consistency, phrased in a way that made it feel like she had been observing me longer than I realized. Some of the notes were small, but incredibly specific. Stuff like responds in steady intervals when uninterested, uses casual phrasing when uncertain, and keeps emotional distance early on. It was like reading a psychological profile of myself written by someone who barely knew me but somehow scored extra credit for accuracy. I couldn't decide between being creeped out or being weirdly impressed against my will. Then I swiped over to the next column. Expiration estimate. For the 10 people above me, it had dates, some red, some yellow, some green. Past dates, future dates, but all precise. Like she predicted the exact moment things would fall apart and assigned it a timestamp. My box didn't have a date yet. It had a blank cell with a small digital clock icon next to it. Aisha cleared her throat a little and explained, in the calmest tone imaginable, as she didn't like emotional guesswork. She said dating worked better when you tracked patterns instead of just going with feelings. She said people think they're unpredictable, but if you take notes and observe reactions, the patterns show themselves. She said she used the sheet to avoid wasting time. Avoid wasting time. Like dating was an experiment, like people were data points, like emotions had expiration dates she could calculate. She didn't sound cold when she said all this. That's what made it so strange. She talked about the spreadsheet like it was a tool, something completely neutral and practical. She wasn't gloating. She wasn't apologizing. She wasn't trying to impress me. She was just explaining the way she organized her connections. I asked her how she got some of the information, and she said she had reading through my messages and my profile to cross-check personality traits she thought matched certain archetypes. She didn't see why that was weird. She said most people don't read the details, but she does. The longer I looked at the sheet, the more I noticed how much detail she collected on people. Stuff about pacing, tone, energy levels, how often they talked about themselves, how many questions they asked, whether their goals aligned with hers long-term. Every row looked like a blueprint of a person's personality condensed into data cells. I didn't know whether to keep staring or immediately slide her phone back across the table. She told me she added my name earlier that day and was waiting to see how meeting in person would fill in the missing columns. Then she said, casually as anything, that by next week she'd likely have enough information to generate an estimate. Generate an estimate. Like she was forecasting the weather. I didn't want to freak out publicly, so I just nodded and pretended it was interesting. But inside my head was this chaotic swirl of questions. Why me? Why now? How many people had actually stayed on her spreadsheet without being erased? Why didn't anyone warn me? We talked a little longer, but everything felt different after the big reveal. I kept glancing at the phone sitting between us like it was some kind of silent judge deciding my fate pixel by pixel. Eventually, I told her I had to go. She didn't look offended. She didn't even look confused. She just nodded and saved the spreadsheet like she was proud of the progress. On the walk home, I kept replaying the moment she turned the screen toward me. That spreadsheet felt burned into my mind. Some part of me kept wondering what expiration estimate she was going to put next to my name once she decided she had enough information. Now, whenever someone asks me a question about myself, I half joke in my head that they're probably adding it to some secret chart. But with Aisha, it wasn't a joke. It was a system. I should warn you right from the start. This one didn't ease in slowly. There wasn't a gentle build-up or a weird vibe I ignored. It was just me, thinking I was going on another regular date, and then Moss dropping something so unreal on me that I needed a full day afterward to convince myself it actually happened. If the earlier dates were strange, this one went past strange and straight into something that honestly felt like a deleted scene from a show that never aired. It started on a boring Saturday morning. I woke up too early because sunlight was blasting through my blinds like it had a personal issue with me. My room felt warm but not comfortable, and my brain was in that mode where everything feels a little floaty. I kept flipping through apps on my phone without really paying attention until I landed on a match notification from Moss. His profile had this kind of mellow vibe. He looked like the type of guy who listened to indie music and kept too many tabs open on his browser. Nothing alarming, nothing intense. Just a guy with messy hair and a hoodie, smiling like he wasn't even aware someone took the picture. One of the photos had him holding a sketchbook, another had him sitting on grass near a campus somewhere. Chill vibe. We talked for a bit, and he suggested meeting at a little sandwich spot near the library. I liked that place, mostly because their sandwiches were cheap and the seating wasn't packed. It didn't feel like a pressure environment, so I agreed. I got dressed, threw on a jacket, and walked there with this half-awake, half-coasting energy you get when you didn't plan your day and are just letting things happen. When I arrived, he was already inside, sitting at one of the tables near the window. The place wasn't crowded, just some students studying and one guy eating soup way too fast. Moss waved when he saw me, and I noticed he had this relaxed expression like he'd been waiting but wasn't impatient. I sat across from him, and everything started out normal. He asked how my morning was, and I asked him about his classes. He talked with his hands a little, not dramatically, just enough to show he cared about what he was saying. I ordered a sandwich that cost around $8, and he didn't order anything. He said he ate earlier. I didn't think much of it at the time because some people just like to sit and talk. But later I realized that was the first tiny detail that didn't fit. We talked for maybe 15 minutes before things took a turn. He leaned back in his chair, interlocked his fingers, and looked at me with this expression that wasn't creepy, just strangely accomplished, like he'd hit a checkpoint in some personal mission. Then he said he had already gone to my old school. Not drove by it, not looked it up online. Visited, walked through it, taught to someone there. At first, I honestly thought I misunderstood. I thought maybe he was saying he went to a school near mine or he accidentally visited the wrong place. But then he clarified. He said he visited the specific school I read attending. He even mentioned the color of the front doors, the exact layout, the courtyard, all details you only know if you've actually been there in person. He said he wanted to gather foundation. Those were his exact words. I didn't even react right away because my brain was trying so hard to rationalize it. I figured maybe he was messing with me, trying to be edgy. But then he said something that made my stomach drop in a way that made my spine feel really cold. He said he talked to a teacher who remembered me. A teacher. Not a staff member. Not a secretary. A teacher. And he didn't say it dramatically. He said it like someone mentioning they ran into a mutual friend. Like it wasn't a giant leap to go track down someone connected to my past for the sake of a first date. He told me he sat in one of the empty classrooms with a teacher, talking about student memories and the school's changes over the years. He described the room perfectly, the posters on the walls, the chipped paint near the windows, the old heater that rattled every winter. He described the exact desk arrangement from when I went there. Things I had forgotten until that moment. My sandwich suddenly felt heavier in my hands. I asked him why he went there, and he said he wanted to understand the environment that shaped me. Like it was a normal thing to investigate. Like it wasn't crossing several lines before we even met in person. He said he wanted to know whether I came from a quiet background or a loud one, whether my school had a strong community, whether teachers were strict or easygoing. He said these things mattered if you wanted to build something real. He explained it calmly, like he wasn't talking about doing something extreme. He told me that reading through old posts I made years ago to figure out where I might have gone. He said he pieced together the school name based on timing and location. He talked about it like he was proud of his research skills, like this was something impressive. The more he talked, the stranger it became. He said he walked around the hallways imagining me moving through them at a younger age. He said he visited the cafeteria and tried to picture which table I'd choose. He said he even checked the little grassy area behind the gym to see if it felt like a place someone would sit during breaks. He made it sound like he was mapping a world he thought he needed to understand entirely before sitting across from me that afternoon. And the worst part, he didn't seem unaware. He didn't look like someone who realized he'd crossed a line. He acted like he thought I'd appreciate it, like I think it was thoughtful. I tried to mentally backtrack and think if I had ever told him anything that implied this kind of deep dive was okay. I came up with nothing. Absolutely nothing. All we talked about before meeting was food and weather and school stress. At no point did I ever say, hey, feel free to go on a field trip through my childhood. While he kept explaining, I noticed the way he fidgeted with the strap of his bag. He wasn't nervous. It was more like he was excited to tell me everything he discovered. He said he hoped the teacher's description of me wasn't too biased, and he laughed lightly like he was sharing a fun secret. My brain didn't know how to process that laugh. He leaned forward and asked if the visit gave him enough foundation or if he needed to look deeper. Look deeper into what? Into who? It felt like he was collecting clues for some investigation only he understood. I tried to steer the conversation back to something normal, but he kept drifting back to my school. He talked about hallways, classrooms, the posters promoting clubs. I didn't even remember being at that school. He talked about the teacher, describing me as quiet on Mondays and more talkative by midweek, and he seemed fascinated by that detail. When he asked if he should revisit later to get a better understanding, something inside me snapped into clarity. I told him I needed to leave. I didn't pretend. I didn't sugarcoat it. I just said I had to go. He didn't get offended. He didn't argue. He didn't look confused. He just nodded like the date had reached its natural endpoint and said he hoped the foundation he gathered would be enough to build on. Build what? With who? And why was he so sure I'd be part of that blueprint he'd drawn? When I walked out of the sandwich shop, everything felt hyper-real. The street noise, the sunlight, the cars, it all felt like background static. My mind was still stuck in that classroom he visited, imagining him sitting there, asking about me like he was studying a case file. Now, whenever I walk past anything that reminds me of my school, old buses, certain buildings, the faded green paint of gym walls, I get this weird tightening in my chest. Not fear, not panic, just this strange ache from realizing someone walked through the places I grew up in before I even got the chance to meet him properly. I'm just going to dive straight into this one, because there isn't some dramatic build-up or emotional backstory behind why I went on this date. It wasn't planned. It wasn't intentional. It wasn't one of those days where I felt inspired or bored or restless. It was more like one of those weird in-between afternoons where nothing is wrong, but nothing is interesting either, and you just kind of drift from one thing to another until something wakes you up a little. That's exactly the headspace I was in when I matched with Lauren. Her profile didn't stand out much at first glance. A couple pictures at concerts, one of her laughing with friends, one where she was eating fries in the passenger seat of a car. She had this energetic look about her, like someone who always had a plan, or at least pretended she did. The kind of person who could convince you to go somewhere random at 10 p.m. and somehow make it fun. Nothing about her gave off weird energy. If anything, she seemed almost too normal. She messaged me saying she happened to be near this small pizza place a few blocks from where I live and asked if I wanted to join her since she didn't feel like eating alone. I didn't think too hard about it. Pizza sounded good, and sitting at home doing nothing didn't. So I said yes, threw on a jacket, and headed out the door. The pizza place was one of those spots that always smelled the same: dough, sauce, and that slightly burnt cheese aroma that somehow made the place feel older than it actually was. When I walked in, I spotted her at a booth right near the front window. She waved at me like we'd known each other longer than 5 minutes, and she had this casual confidence that somehow made the room feel smaller. I sat across from her, and right away everything was comfortable. She talked fast, but not in a nervous way. More like she had a backlog of thoughts she'd been waiting to dump on someone. She asked me questions, joked around, made dumb comments about the decor. It felt genuinely fun, which wasn't something I had experienced on a first date in a while. And she did it. She looked at my seat, then at hers, then back at mine. She tilted her head like she was evaluating something deeply. Then she asked me to switch seats with her. No explanation, no reason, just a simple, let's switch. I honestly thought she dropped something under the seat, or maybe the sun was in her eyes. So I stood up, moved around the table, and sat down where she had been sitting. She slid into my old seat, nodded like she confirmed something in her head, then kept talking like nothing had happened. We talked for a few more minutes. She asked me another question, something about my schedule, and then she paused again. I saw the shift in her eyes before she even said it. Switch with me again. I froze for a second because I genuinely thought she was joking, but she was serious. Completely serious. So I switched again, trying not to make it weird. She sat back down, folded her arms, and studied me for a moment as if the table positions told her some hidden truth. Then she launched right back into conversation, like this was just normal date behavior. After maybe 5 minutes, she did it again. Let's switch one more time. By this point, I felt like some kind of weird experiment subject. But her expression never drifted into creepy territory. She didn't smirk. She wasn't amused. She wasn't nervous. She had this calm, analytical focus, like she was running a test she'd done before. Not on me, just in general. I switched seats again because I had no idea how to say no without making things awkward. She immediately relaxed into the new chair like this was exactly what she'd been waiting for. Once the pizza arrived minus $14 for a medium, which honestly was overpriced, but I wasn't in the mood to argue with the universe about it, she finally explained why she kept switching seats. She said she wanted to test how I respond to forced adjustments. Those were her exact words. Forced adjustments. Not preferences. Not comfort levels. Adjustments. And not ones I chose, ones she controlled. She said most people only adjust when they feel in control, but she preferred to see how someone handled being shifted around by someone else. She wanted to see if I resisted, hesitated, questioned, or complied without thinking. She said it told her everything she needed to know about how adaptable someone was. She said switching seats mid-date had become her go-to method. I didn't know whether to laugh, leave, or ask her how many people she'd done this to. But she kept explaining, and the more she talked, the stranger it got. She said each seat in a restaurant gave off a different dynamic. One seat made you feel on display. One seat made you feel dominant. One made you feel passive. One made you feel unsettled. And switching seats let her see how quickly someone recalibrated. She said she could tell from the way I moved seats that I was situationally flexible. I didn't even know if that was supposed to be a compliment or a warning. Then she leaned in a little and said the last seat switch was the most important one because it showed how someone handled repetition. She said people often comply the first time to be polite, the second time because they don't want to seem rude, and the third time reveals who they actually are. I stared at her for a second, processing everything. She didn't seem like someone trying to manipulate me. She seemed like someone genuinely fascinated by human behavior in this very specific, very unusual way that didn't entirely register as threatening yet. We continued eating, but the whole time I couldn't shake the feeling that she was still evaluating me, even when she wasn't saying anything. She watched how I held the slice, how I reacted to the spicy red pepper flakes, how I sat in the seat I landed in after all the switching. It was like the entire meal was some ongoing assessment. At one point, she rested her elbow on the table and, without looking up from her plate, casually said she'd already written down a few observations about me in a notes app earlier that week. I didn't even know we were at the taking notes stage of anything. Apparently she did. She said she believed compatibility wasn't something you felt, but something you tested for. She said most people date wrong because they leave everything to chance. She said unpredictability wastes time, but structured tests never lie. I didn't agree, but I didn't argue either. After we finished eating, she wanted to do one more seat switch for confirmation, but I told her I needed to get going. She took it well, almost too well. She didn't protest, didn't question me, didn't seem offended that I interrupted her experiment. She just nodded slowly like she was marking the moment down in her mental notes. When I stood up to leave, she stayed seated. She didn't hug me or shake my hand or say something flirty. She just said, "Thanks for participating," like I had filled out a survey instead of going on a date. Walking home, I kept replaying the whole thing, trying to understand if it was strange or brilliant or both. But the thing that stuck with me most wasn't the switching. It was the way she watched each moment with intention, like nothing I did went unnoticed. Now, whenever I sit in a restaurant booth, I catch myself wondering what conclusions she'd draw from whichever seat I choose. I'm going to start this one in a way that actually matches how the whole thing felt. Not dramatic, not chaotic, just strangely ordinary right up until it wasn't. It was one of those days where everything around you feels kind of flat, like the world is running in low battery mode. I'd woken up late, the weather couldn't decide if it wanted to be cold or warm, and my brain was stuck in that weird zone between wanting to do something and wanting to do nothing. I wasn't planning on going out, wasn't planning on matching with anyone, definitely wasn't planning on meeting someone new. But boredom has a weird way of making decisions for you without asking. Ethan matched with me while I was lying on my bed staring at the ceiling. His profile looked clean and minimal, almost too neat. A couple outdoor pictures, one of him at a hiking trail, another sitting on a ledge overlooking some view that probably required too much walking to reach, and one where he was holding a map like some kind of travel brochure model. He had a calm-looking face, not overly serious, not goofy, just very composed. I guess that's what made me swipe. He messaged saying he was grabbing tea at this little outdoor spot near our museum and asked if I wanted to swing by. I didn't even think about it that much. I just changed shirts, grabbed my keys, and headed out. The walk there wasn't long, and I didn't bother rushing. The sky had that washed-out color it gets when the day can't decide how it wants to turn out. Cars passed. Birds made noise. A group of kids rode scooters past me laughing too loud. Everything felt normal. When I arrived, Ethan was sitting at a metal table under one of those big umbrellas. He waved when he saw me, and I noticed he had a backpack sitting next to him, one of those structured ones that people who plan too much usually carry. He looked exactly like his pictures. Calm, steady, almost too comfortable. The conversation started normal. We talked about the weather being annoying, the museum behind us, and whether tea counts as a real caffeine source or if it's just fancy flavored water. He laughed a few times, but even his laugh felt organized somehow. The kind of laugh that doesn't spill, just lands neatly where it's supposed to. About 10 minutes in, he reached down to his backpack. He didn't do it dramatically. He did it like someone grabbing a napkin. He pulled out a rolled-up piece of paper wrapped with a thin rubber band. I thought maybe it was homework or a poster or a menu from somewhere he wanted to show me. He placed it gently on the table, looked at it for a second, then looked at me. He said he wanted to show me something. I wasn't prepared for what that something ended up being. He rolled it open slowly, careful, precise, and right there on the table was a map. Not a tiny folded one. A full wide sheet, almost the size of a small poster. And it wasn't a normal map either. It wasn't of a city or a country. It wasn't directions to anything. It was a map of everywhere I had ever mentioned online that I might want to go in the future. I stared at it, and my first thought was that this had to be a coincidence. But it wasn't. Each pin, each line drawn across the paper, each tiny handwritten label, every single one matched something I had posted or hinted about over the past couple of years. Places I forgot I even said anything about. A trail I said I wanted to try someday. A city I mentioned once while talking to a friend online. A beach I saved a picture of but never talked about publicly. Places from old posts, random comments, even half-thought jokes. He leaned over slightly and pointed at the first pin. He explained that this was the earliest place he saw me mention wanting to visit. Then he moved to the next pin. He said this one lined up with when I started posting more about routines and goals. Then another, and another. He had connected them into a kind of path, arrows showing how one place connected to the next based on trajectory. Yes, he used that word, trajectory. He said he had been putting the map together for a while. Not days. Not weeks. A while. He said he started doing it before we matched because he liked predicting people's next steps. He wasn't bragging. He wasn't shy. He wasn't awkward. He talked about it like someone explaining how they built a model airplane, step by step, focused, dedicated. Every pin on the map had a tiny prediction written next to it. Stuff like, likely after graduation, probably a summer visit, dependent on money, emotional motivation, moderate, life phase marker. He said he wanted me to confirm or correct the path so he could refine it. Refine it. Like my entire future was a rough draft. I tried to make sense of it, flipping through memories trying to figure out which posts he even pulled from. Some I remembered, some I didn't. Some were so old I couldn't believe he found them. It felt like he had combed through pieces of my life I'd thrown online without thinking. He explained that a person's direction becomes clearer when you track the places they want to go, not the places they've been. He said most people reveal their future accidentally through wish lists, saved posts, casual mentions. He said he wasn't trying to invade anything, he just liked understanding patterns. He pointed to a location circled near the bottom. He said he predicted I'd go there during a turning point in my life. I didn't even know what to say to that. Every time I tried to speak, he'd wait quietly, hands folded, the map lying between us like some mixed-up treasure chart. I asked him how many people he had made maps for. He said only a few. He said they never saw theirs because none of them matched with him long enough. Then he said something that made my chest tighten for a second. He said mine was the most detailed one he'd ever made. He explained it was because I had a clear internal pattern. He said my goals lined up, my habits matched my words, and my pictures had a consistent emotional tone. He said he could predict me cleanly. Predict me cleanly. Like I was an equation. I didn't want to offend him or cause a scene, so I stayed polite. But I also didn't know how to keep talking with a giant future map of my life sitting on the table in front of me like a prophecy someone forged from old posts and personal guesses. He asked me to go through each place and tell him if he got it right. I pretended to skim, nodding here and there, but mostly I was trying to figure out how to leave without making it weird. When the moment felt right, I told him I needed to head home. He nodded like he expected it, not disappointed, not confused, just accepting. He rolled the map back up carefully, placing the rubber band around it with this deliberate precision I still remember way too clearly. Then he slipped it back into his backpack and told me he might update the map later depending on what I corrected. Depending on what I corrected. As I was co-authoring a plan he already wrote. Walking away from that table felt like stepping out of a parallel universe. My head was buzzing, not because I was scared, but because the whole situation felt too surreal to fit into my normal life. Sometimes now, when I mention wanting to go somewhere, even casually, I catch myself wondering if he'd add another pin. Not because he's watching, but because from one strange afternoon, someone acted like they knew where my path was going better than I did. I'm warning you right now, this one didn't creep up slowly or drop hints or roll in with red flags waving in the distance. It just happened out of nowhere, like when you open a cabinet and a cup falls out even though nothing should have been touching it. The whole situation felt like one of those moments life throws at you just to see if you're paying attention. It started on a random weekday afternoon when I was killing time between errands. I wasn't bored, but I wasn't exactly entertained either. My phone battery was low enough to be annoying, but not low enough to make me stop using it. I sat on a bench outside the grocery store drinking something cold and scrolling without intention. That's when I matched with Kimberly. Her profile had this confident energy to it. Not in a flashy way, more like she knew exactly how she wanted to present herself. Clean photos, sharp lighting, hair perfect in every shot. She had pictures of her hiking, cooking, standing on some rooftop patio, even one with her holding a tiny plant like it was the star of the show. She seemed put together, the kind of person who probably labeled their drawers and actually followed the labels. She messaged first and asked if I wanted to meet for a quick drink at this casual cafe near the park. Since I was already out and didn't want to head back home to my messy room, I said sure. It was close, and I figured a short hangout wouldn't hurt. The cafe was one of those places that tried really hard to look homemade even though everything inside was obviously from a store. They had mismatched chairs, drawings from kids pinned on the walls, and a smell that was half coffee, half sugar, and half something that had been in the oven for too long. I walked in and spotted Kimberly right away. She was sitting near the corner, back straight, hands around a cup like she was warming them even though the weather wasn't cold. She smiled when she saw me. Her smile was sharp and focused, like she was already evaluating something about me. She stood up, greeted me, and sat back down with a smoothness that almost felt rehearsed. We ordered drinks. Mine was this iced chocolate thing that cost around $6. Hers was some herbal tea that smelled like flowers and medicine at the same time. We started talking about basic stuff. Where we grew up, what we were doing that week, dumb things we saw online. She laughed at a few things, but her laugh was short and controlled, like she didn't want it to spill over. Everything felt normal until she reached into her bag. She pulled out a thermometer. A real thermometer. Not digital. The old school kind with a clear casing and a line inside it. She placed it gently on the table like it was a business card she wanted me to take. I stared at it for a second, thinking maybe she just bought it and forgot to put it away. She didn't say anything at first, just kept sipping her tea. Then she slid it slightly closer to me. I asked her, in the calmest voice I could manage, why she had a thermometer at a cafe. She told me she brings one on every date. Every date. She said she liked tracking people's temperatures because it told her how they reacted to her emotionally. She said most people underestimate biological signals, but she didn't. She said body temperature is the most honest reaction anyone has. That's what she called it, the honest reaction. I tried to play it cool even though inside, my brain was doing backflips. I asked her if she expected people to actually let her take their temperature, and she nodded like it was the most obvious thing in the world. She said she had never had someone refuse, but she didn't mind if I did. She said refusing had its own meaning. Accepting had its own meaning. Everything meant something to her. Then she held the thermometer between two fingers and lifted it slightly, indicating she wanted me to give her my hand. Before I could even process how weird that was, she reached across the table and placed the thermometer against the side of my neck. Not roughly, not aggressively, just calmly, firmly, and unexpectedly. She didn't warn me or ask if I was ready. She did it like someone checking the time. The glass was cold, and I instinctively jerked back a little, but she held it in place just long enough to check whatever she needed to. Then she removed it, studied the little line inside, and nodded in this quiet, satisfied way. I didn't even know what temperature she got. I didn't want to ask. She set the thermometer down, folded her hands on the table, and explained her whole system to me. Apparently, she charts every day based on physiological markers. Temperature, breathing speed, eye contact, tone of voice. She said she could tell compatibility faster with those signals than with conversations. She said this wasn't about romance. It wasn't about control. It wasn't about being creepy. She said it was about honesty. Biological truth, she called it. She said feelings lie, but the body doesn't. The whole time she talked, she maintained perfect posture. She sat with this eerie stillness, like she forgot she was in a cafe and not in some lab running tests. Meanwhile, I was deciding whether to pretend I wasn't freaked out or just skip straight to leaving. She then pulled out her phone, opened a notes app, and began typing something. She didn't hide it or angle the screen away. She typed 3 lines. Baseline reaction, stable. Temperature change, low. Behavioral spike, mild. She didn't even glance at me while writing it. It was like she was updating a case file. When she finally looked up, she smiled again. Not warmly, not coldly, just precisely. I took a long sip of my drink just to give myself time to think. She waited patiently, elbows resting on the table as if she was observing how I held the cup. Her attention was so focused it almost felt like physical pressure. She asked me what I thought of her system. I told her in the politest tone I could manage that it was definitely unique. She nodded like I had confirmed a hypothesis. She said being unique was the only way to understand people fully. She asked if I wanted to know what my temperature reading meant to her. I politely declined. She seemed unfazed. She talked a bit more about the people she'd gone out with before. She said some people's temperatures rose the moment she spoke. Some dropped during silence. She said one person had such steady readings that she never saw him again because she decided he was emotionally inert. She said it calmly, like she was reviewing old data instead of talking about real people. Eventually, I made up a reason to head out. Something about needing to get home before traffic got bad. She didn't press me on it. She didn't look disappointed either. She just nodded and said she'd record the rest of her notes later. Record the rest of her notes. Like the date was a science experiment that didn't need my presence to continue. When I walked out of the cafe, I felt the air on my skin in this new weird way. Like suddenly I was hyper aware of my own temperature, like she had tricked my brain into thinking it mattered more than it ever has. Sometimes, even now, when I feel warm or cold for no reason, a part of me remembers that moment, or leaning forward, thermometer in hand, acting like she was taking the core reading of who I was. Okay, listen to this one. This story didn't begin with excitement or nerves or any of that typical first date energy. It started with me being annoyed. Not annoyed at him, not annoyed at dating, just annoyed at the day itself. Everything I tried to do that morning went slightly wrong in the most irritating way possible. My charger only worked if I held it in a specific angle. My cereal tasted stale, even though I bought it 2 days earlier. I stepped in something sticky on my kitchen floor that I swear wasn't there the night before, and even my shirt wouldn't sit right. So yeah, I wasn't exactly in the best mood when I opened the app. Which is probably why I didn't think twice when I matched with Nigel. His profile gave off this calm, minimal, almost quiet vibe. A guy in a plain hoodie standing by a railing. a picture of him sitting in a lawn chair staring at the sky. One awkward selfie that looked like he took it accidentally. His bio said he liked order, structure, and peaceful people, which in any other mood I might have read as a red flag, but in my annoyed state I shrugged and swiped. His messages were short, but not rude. Very neat typing, no emojis, no chaos. He asked if I wanted to meet at a little coffee truck parked by the old train platform. I said sure. I needed to get out of the house anyway. The walk there helped reset my brain a bit. The air was cool but not sharp, the kind that wakes you up without making you shiver. There were birds doing whatever birds do, cars humming in the distance, and people walking their dogs like it was some universal rule to look calmer than everyone else. By the time I reached the platform area, my irritation faded into that strange neutrality where anything feels possible. Navel stood near the truck already. He was easy to spot because he stood so still. Not stiff, not awkward, just perfectly still, hands in pockets, eyes scanning the area like he was taking in every detail. When he saw me, he lifted his hand in a brief, controlled wave. No big smile, no awkward shuffle, just a calm acknowledgement. I walked up, ordered a drink that cost around $5, and stood beside him. We started talking about normal things, how the old platform used to be busier, how coffee trucks always smell better than actual cafes, stuff like that. He didn't talk too much. He didn't talk too little. His tone was steady, like he had practiced it his whole life. At first, he honestly felt refreshingly simple. Then everything shifted. The moment didn't come with a dramatic pause or a creepy smile. He just kind of said it casually in the same tone someone uses to point out cloud shapes. He mentioned that before agreeing to meet me, he installed a motion sensor outside his house. At first, I laughed because I thought he was joking. The way he said it was so flat and calm that it had to be a joke, right? But he wasn't laughing. He wasn't even smirking. He just nodded once, confirming it like he had told me the weather. I asked him why, genuinely confused, and he explained it like it was the most practical decision in the world. He said he wanted to make sure I didn't approach his house before our date. He said it wasn't personal, just a measure of baseline respect. His words, not mine. He said most people claim to respect boundaries but don't follow them. So he sets up systems, actual systems, to verify behavior. Systems. He said the sensor would alert him if anyone stepped within a certain radius. Then he paused, looked at me, and added, "Don't worry, you didn't trigger it." Like I should feel proud of that. I stared at him for a full second, trying to understand whether I was talking to someone extremely cautious, extremely paranoid, or extremely committed to some personal philosophy he never mentioned on his profile. He didn't seem embarrassed or intense. He wasn't sweating or fidgeting or trying to justify anything. He just stated facts like he was discussing his groceries. The calmness almost made it weirder. He took a sip of his drink and continued explaining. He said he likes to test people before he meets them. He said intentions don't matter, actions do. He believes if someone is going to cross boundaries, they show signs early. He said the motion sensor was step one. Step one. That terrified me more than the sensor. He said step two was observing how I approached him in public. He said he watched the exact moment I walked up, how fast I moved, whether I hesitated, how close I stood, how I angled my shoulders. He said these things reveal whether someone understands spatial respect. Spatial respect. I didn't know whether to laugh or leave. He wasn't done. He said he also pays attention to how people position themselves while standing and sitting. He said people who crowd space tend to crowd emotions later. People who keep distance tend to be unreliable. People who match his pace or rhythm tend to be aligned. He said I had a controlled pace. I didn't even know what that meant. He explained that he believes all relationships start with physical patterns, not emotional ones. He said he'd spent years documenting how people move when they're comfortable, when they're lying, when they're nervous, when they're hiding something. He said he wasn't judging me, just observing. Just observing. The whole time his voice stayed level. Not excited, not creepy, not annoyed, just level. When we sat at a bench near the platform, he positioned himself exactly 1 seat away. Not too close, not far. Perfectly measured. I could tell he put thought into it. He watched the world around us with this eerie calmness, occasionally glancing at me with the same expression someone might use while checking the time. At one point, he casually mentioned he had also checked the street camera near his building to confirm I didn't pass by earlier in the day. He said it wasn't stalking, just verification. He said people lie about their habits, and he prefers actual data. Actual data. I finished my drink mostly as a distraction at that point, pretending I wasn't mentally recalibrating everything I thought I knew about this date. I tried to redirect the conversation toward more normal things, hobbies, work, anything that didn't involve sensors or surveillance, but he always drifted back to behavior analysis. He liked studying people, but not in the casual, I love psychology way. He studied them like someone collecting field notes. Pure observation, no emotion mixed in, just analysis. He said he thought meeting me was a low-risk test. Low risk. He didn't even try to soften the phrasing. He said if I had approached his house before the date, even accidentally, it would told him everything he needed to know. He said too many people jump ahead emotionally, and he refuses to let that happen again. At that point, I couldn't tell if he had been hurt before or if he had built an entire philosophy around paranoia. Eventually, I told him I needed to head out. It wasn't rude or rushed, just clear. He nodded slowly, taking a moment before responding, as if analyzing the decision rather than reacting to it. He said he appreciated the low interference meeting. Low interference. I didn't know if that meant I passed, failed, or just existed in whatever grading system he had built for himself. As I walked away, I felt this bizarre mix of relief and confusion. The sunlight hit differently, the noise of the street felt louder, and I kept replaying his calm voice saying he installed a motion sensor because he wanted to check if I approached without permission. For a moment, I actually looked up at a random building corner to see if there were cameras pointed anywhere near me, which annoyed me even more because it meant his weird logic had gotten under my skin for a second. Now, whenever I walk by someone's house, even a stranger's, I catch myself wondering whether they have motion sensors waiting for me to step into their perimeter. I'm starting this one in a way that fits how the whole day felt. Scattered. Not dramatic, not stressful. Just scattered in that annoying way where nothing lines up cleanly. I'd woken up late, read a couple messages I didn't feel like answering, stared at my closet for too long trying to figure out what to wear even though I wasn't going anywhere important, and then spent way too long sitting at my desk doing literally nothing. It felt like my brain was buffering. So when I opened the app out of habit and saw the match with Amber, I didn't think twice about replying. I didn't overanalyze or hesitate. I just went with it because the day already felt like a filler episode, and I didn't mind adding one more random thing. Amber's profile looked like she belonged in one of those aesthetic Instagram posts, but without the try-hard vibe. Her pictures weren't filtered to death. One was her at a thrift shop holding up a jacket. Another was her sitting on the back of a truck bed with a milkshake. She had freckles, a wide grin, and hair that looked like it did whatever it wanted, but in a stylish way. Her bio mentioned she liked details, which I didn't think too deeply about at the time. I figured she meant details in conversation or details in fashion. Definitely not the kind of details she actually meant. She suggested meeting at this outdoor smoothie stand near the lake. It was the kind of place with bright umbrellas, a line that was always too long, and the sound of blenders running nonstop. I went because the weather wasn't horrible for once, and I needed a reason to get out of my room before I melted into my mattress. When I arrived, she was already there, leaning against the railing facing the water. She looked relaxed but alert, the kind of person who seemed to be taking in everything around her. She waved at me with her cup already in hand, a bright pink drink topped with fruit that looked way too expensive. I got in line, grabbed something that cost around $7, and joined her at the railing. The first few minutes of the date felt completely normal. She asked about my day. I told her about my boring morning. She told me about losing her keys twice that week. We talked about how the lake water always looked clean from far away, but probably wasn't. The atmosphere was just easy, light, nothing intense. She felt like someone who could talk to anyone without trying too hard. Then she shifted her cup to her left hand, reached in her bag with her right, and pulled out her phone. I thought she was going to show me a picture or a video. She held the phone between us for a moment like she was lining something up in her head. Then she told me to hold out my hand. Not in a coy way, not in a romantic way, in a focused way. I hesitated for a second, mostly because I didn't know what she was doing. But she lifted her eyebrows a little, urging me silently, so I gave her my hand. She didn't touch it. She didn't squeeze it or hold it. She just angled her phone and pushed it across the railing toward me. On the screen was a set of sketches. Sketches of hands. My hands. specifically my nails. My nails were different angles, side view, front view, a few rough outlines of finger shapes. Some sketches had little notes next to them. Stuff like slight curve, asymmetrical edges, potential match line, and original observation from distance. Each sketch looked like it was drawn fast but with intention. She had paid attention to every tiny detail, lines I didn't even realize my nails had. I stared at the sketches, then at her, then back at the sketches, waiting for her to laugh and say it was a joke. She didn't laugh. She took a slow sip of her smoothie instead, watching my reaction like she already knew how it would play out. She said she had made the sketches weeks earlier. Weeks? Before we matched. She said she first noticed my hands in a reflection of a metal sign outside a cafe. Apparently, she had been sitting inside while I was outside waiting for my order, and the reflection showed just enough for her to see the details of my knuckles and nails. She said it caught her attention instantly. She said hands tell her everything she needs to know about a person. Everything. She said she studied the shape, the taper, the way I held my phone, the tension in my fingers, the way I interacted with objects. She said she sketched everything that stood out, then tried to match the sketches to my profile after she saw me on the app. I didn't even know what to say. I didn't even know how to think. She shrugged like she knew it sounded strange, but she didn't seem the slightest bit embarrassed. She said everyone has something they notice first. Eyes, clothes, hair, posture. But hers was always hands. She said hands never lie. I wasn't sure if I should feel flattered, weirded out, or impressed. Maybe all three. She talked about it in this calm, matter-of-fact tone, like she wasn't confessing to tracking the shape of my nails from a reflection. She said she liked the way my nails curved slightly at the edges instead of being perfectly straight. She said she guessed I fidget when thinking. She said she could tell I didn't bite my nails but pressed my thumb against them sometimes. She was right about all of it. She pointed to one of the sketches and said she wasn't sure about the exact angle of one finger, and she had hoped seeing my hand in person would confirm it. She reached out gently, not touching, just hovering her hand near mine to compare her drawing to reality. Then she took her thumb back and added a note typing fast with her thumb. Confirmed match. Predictable curvature. Predictable curvature. Like she was documenting a plant or something. I asked her why she cared about nail shapes so much, trying to keep my voice steady. She said it helped her understand how careful someone was, how anxious they were, how they handled stress. She said the way someone keeps their nails gives away their habits, patience, and even their sense of control. She said it was her way of seeing someone honestly. I didn't know how to respond, so I just nodded like I was processing it calmly instead of spiraling internally. She wasn't done, though. She said she'd made predictions about how I'd hold my smoothie cup, how I'd rest my hand on the railing, and how I'd react when she showed me the sketches. She told me I matched two of the predictions perfectly and the third close enough. Then she asked if she could take a photo of my hand now for final documentation. She said it quietly but clearly, like she had done this before with other people. I declined, as politely as humanly possible. She didn't get upset. She didn't insist. She just nodded like she expected the refusal and made a mental note I didn't have access to. The rest of the date was oddly normal, like nothing gigantic had happened. She talked about movies, about school stress, about random things. I answered, but the whole time I was hyper-aware of my hands. I didn't want to fidget. I didn't want to scratch. I didn't want to adjust my grip on my cup. It felt like every movement might get silently graded. When I said I needed to head out, she nodded with the same calm confidence she had since the start. Before I left, she glanced at my hands one more time, not in a creepy way, more like someone checking the final detail of a drawing they planned to finish later. Walking away, I shoved my hands in my pockets even though it was too warm for that. The whole interaction replayed in my mind nonstop. The reflection, the sketches, the notes, the predictions, her certainty. Now, every time I catch the shape of my nails in a mirror or a window, I think about how someone out there once studied them like they were a clue. The only way I can explain the headspace I was in that day is this. I felt like background noise in my own life. Not in a sad way, just in that weird disconnected mood where nothing feels like it belongs to you, and you're kind of floating beside yourself watching things happen. I've been wandering around my room, picking things up and setting them back down for no reason, opening my curtains and closing them again, checking my phone every 10 minutes even though nobody was saying anything. It was that kind of day, slow, blurry around the edges, pointless. Then I matched with Logan. His profile didn't stand out much. 4 pictures, one of him sitting by a fountain, another of him at a nighttime fair, one where he was holding a drink in a plastic cup, and a final one taken inside some arcade. Nothing staged, nothing overly polished. He had this calm half smile in every picture, like he was always halfway in on a joke, but didn't feel like explaining it. His bio said he liked puzzles and quiet surprises. Normally, I would scroll past that because it sounded artsy in a vague way, but the day already felt strange, so I figured why not. He messaged me asking if I wanted to meet somewhere low effort. He suggested this tiny cafe tucked behind the library, a place I'd been to maybe twice in my whole life. It was close enough, and I wasn't doing anything meaningful, so I said yes. I changed clothes without much thought, grabbed my keys, and walked out before I could overthink any of it. The air outside felt heavier than usual, like it was holding out the leftover rain even though it hadn't actually rained. The sky was dull, the kind of color that makes everything else look faded. When I reached the cafe, the smell of warm pastries drifted out, mixing with the scent of old books from the library next door. Logan was already sitting outside at one of the metal tables. He waved when he saw me, and I noticed he had this small sealed envelope sitting directly in front of him. Not tucked away. Not hidden. Right in the middle of the table. I sat down, expecting him to move it or explain it or at least acknowledge it, but he didn't. He asked how my day was going, and we talked about random things, school, routines, stuff we were tired of. He was easy to talk to in a very steady, grounded way. His voice never rose too high or dipped too low. He didn't ramble. He didn't interrupt. It was the kind of conversation where you feel like you could talk without trying to impress anyone. But that envelope stayed in the center of the table the whole time, untouched, like it was waiting. I kept glancing at it, trying not to be obvious, but it was impossible not to stare. It was small, cream-colored, perfectly sealed with a neat line of glue. No writing on the outside. No marks. No folds. Just clean and deliberate, like it came from some stationery set that only organized people own. After maybe 15 minutes, Logan finally placed his hand on the envelope. He didn't slide it toward me yet. He just rested his fingers on it lightly. He said he brought it specifically for this date. He said the envelope contained predictions he had written the night before about how I would react during different moments. Not just general things, specific things. He said he'd sealed it so he couldn't change anything after seeing me in person. He wanted the predictions to remain untainted, as he put it. He said I wasn't allowed to open it until the date was over. Then he let go of it and folded his hands like he hadn't just dropped the weirdest statement I'd heard all week. I stared at the envelope like it might start glowing. Part of me wanted to grab it immediately. Another part wanted to ask 1,000 questions. But the biggest part of me, the part still floating through the day, just accepted it. I nodded slowly, trying to act like this was something I encountered all the time. We kept talking, and he acted completely normal after that. He talked about how he liked observing the way people process things. He said everyone has patterns even when they think they don't. He said he didn't care about guessing the future in a dramatic way. He just liked seeing how people responded to situations they didn't anticipate. Every so often, his eyes flicked toward the envelope, not with worry but with a kind of quiet satisfaction, like this was step 2 in some plan only he understood. He didn't rush me. He didn't push me toward it. He let it sit there like a silent watcher. I started overthinking everything I did. If I picked up my drink too quickly, I wondered if he predicted that. If I hesitated before answering a question, I wondered if that was in the envelope too. If I looked at the door, the sky, my hands, anything, I wondered if I was following a script he already knew. It made me hyper-aware of my own behavior in a way that didn't feel scary, just bizarre, like I was walking through a maze someone else built for me. Eventually we ordered pastries. Mine cost $4 and his cost $3. And while we ate, he told me he enjoyed giving himself small challenges. He said predicting someone else's reactions was a way to keep himself alert. He said he rarely got them all right, but he didn't mind being wrong. He liked refining his guesses afterward. Refining. Like this was an experiment. He insisted it wasn't manipulative. He said he never used predictions to control anything, just to understand. He said people rarely understand themselves, so he liked seeing what aligned and what didn't. I didn't know how to respond. I didn't feel threatened by him, but I didn't feel entirely comfortable either. It was like being studied by someone who wasn't unkind, but still very intentional. When the date started winding down, he finally pushed the envelope toward me. The sound it made against the table was impossibly soft, like he'd done this before. He told me again not to open it until the date officially ended. I didn't know what officially meant, but I assumed it meant once we parted ways. We walked out of the cafe together and stopped at the corner where our paths split. He thanked me for coming and said he hoped the envelope didn't make things too strange. I didn't know how to answer that without lying, so I just said it definitely made things memorable. He smiled, small, controlled, but real. Then he walked away with that calm stride of his. The envelope felt heavier in my hand than it should have. Not physically, just in meaning. When I got halfway down the street, away from the cafe, the library, away from anyone who might see me, I finally opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper folded cleanly into thirds. No smudges, no rushed handwriting. Everything was neat and organized, each line spaced perfectly apart. There were 5 predictions listed, 5 moments he thought I'd react to. He got 3 of them exactly right. One was close enough that I felt weirdly called out. One was completely wrong. But the strangest part wasn't that he predicted me. It was that he predicted the parts of me I don't think about. The small reactions, the little hesitations, the ways I shift when I'm processing a new situation. It was like he saw the version of me that usually stays in the background. I folded the page back up slowly, trying not to think too hard about it. I put it in my pocket like it might burn a hole through the fabric if I held it too long. The whole walk home, my head felt noisy. Not scared, not panicked, just buzzing. Because part of me kept thinking, how much of me can a stranger see that I don't even notice myself? I'm going to start this one in a way that makes sense for how the whole thing hit me bluntly. No warm buildup, no gentle slide into weirdness, no gradual realization. It was like getting shoved sideways by something you didn't see coming, even though it was standing right in front of you the whole time. This day didn't sneak up on me. It ambushed me politely. It was a rough afternoon already. Not dramatic, just uncomfortable in that useless way where nothing fits right. My hoodie felt too heavy, my shoes felt too tight, my hair wouldn't sit the way I wanted it to, and everything I tried to get done took twice as long as it should have. I kept pacing around my room like something was supposed to happen, but never did. I wasn't tired, but I wasn't awake either, just stuck. That's the mood I was in when Brooke matched with me. Her profile didn't look strange at all. If anything, it looked extremely normal. A picture of her sitting cross-legged in the grass, another where she was holding the coffee cup with a goofy expression, one selfie with decent lighting, and one candid where she was laughing at something off-screen. Nothing curated, nothing overdone. She had the kind of smile that made you think she probably made friends easily. Her bio said she liked being observant, which I skimmed past because I assumed she meant it in a casual, non-peculiar way. She messaged me saying she was near the shopping center and asked if I wanted to meet at the outdoor tables between the bakery and the ice cream shop. I wasn't planning on going anywhere, but the idea of staying in my room all day made me feel like I was turning into static. So I said sure. Walking there felt like my body was on autopilot. Everything looked normal enough, cars passing, kids screaming about toys, people arguing over prices inside stores, that constant hum of crowds moving around each other. When I spotted her, she was sitting at a round metal table, spinning her cup slowly between her palms like she was keeping time with something only she could hear. She smiled when I approached, and it didn't feel forced. She had this easy presence, like she'd been waiting calmly instead of awkwardly checking her phone every 10 seconds. We said hi, sat down, and started talking about nothing specific, classes, errands, tiredness, random stuff people fill the silence with. She laughed a lot, and not in a fake way. She leaned forward when she listened. She had that vibe of someone who could make a boring situation feel kind of alive. Everything was normal until it wasn't. About 10 minutes in, she sat back, crossed her legs, and looked at me with this strange mixture of confidence and relief, like she had finally reached a checkpoint she'd been aiming for. Then, out of nowhere, she said something that made my stomach drop even though her tone didn't change at all. She said she hadn't matched with anyone for 2 months. I thought she meant she'd been on a break, which is common. But then she clarified. She didn't take a break. She avoided matching with anyone. deliberately, because she had been studying me. My face must have done something because she laughed softly, not mocking, just like she already knew I'd react that way. She twirled her cup again, eyes focused on me, and explained it like she was talking about making a playlist or planning a trip. She said she watched how I swiped, when I was active, when I disappeared, when I came back. She said she tracked the times I opened the app based on how fast I responded to small changes. She said she noticed patterns in when I matched people compared to when I didn't. She said she'd been timing her own activity to sync with mine. Not by accident. On purpose. She said she wanted her timing to feel inevitable. That word punched through the air. Inevitable. Like matching with me wasn't coincidence, but a scheduled event she'd been waiting for. She said she wanted the moment to feel natural for me, even though she'd been orchestrating it quietly for weeks. She didn't call it manipulation. She didn't call it planning. She called it alignment. She said 2 months was the optimum observation window because she didn't want to approach too early or too late. I didn't even know how to react. My brain was trying to keep up, like flipping through pages too fast to read them. She wasn't nervous or apologetic. She wasn't bragging. She was just explaining her process calmly, almost academically. She said she tracked the way I changed my bio twice. She said she read the shift in my posting habits on other apps. She said she noticed when I went quiet for a few days and predicted it was because I felt burnt out. She said she didn't want to match with me when I was mentally cluttered. Mentally cluttered. She said she waited for the moment I seemed the most open, based on the kind of posts I liked, the time of day I became more active, and how quickly I checked messages. I didn't even know what to say. Part of me was freaked out, part of me was impressed by the dedication, and part of me was wondering how much of my life I accidentally broadcast without realizing it. She reached into her bag and pulled out a notebook, not a big one, just a small paperback with a few stickers on the front. She flipped it open casually. Inside were pages of handwritten notes, dates, times, observations, short sentences like, active around afternoon, probably tired. Swiped slower today. Thoughtful mood. Doesn't match when posting late at night. More likely to swipe right on days with rain. Less active after certain topics trend. She showed me 3 pages openly, without hesitation. She didn't force me to read them, but she let me see them. Then she turned the notebook around and tapped the most recent entry. Today's date. The entry said, matched exactly when predicted. Timing successful. She looked up again and smiled, not smugly, not proudly, just with this calm satisfaction like everything lined up the way she wanted. I asked her why she went through all that trouble. Her answer was so simple it almost felt unreal. She said she wanted the moment we met to feel like it was supposed to happen. She said she believed some people collide too randomly and never get the timing right, so she preferred to wait until everything matched up. She said rushing things ruins them, and forcing things breaks them, so she studied instead. She said studying made everything smoother. I tried to piece together what that meant. She wasn't claiming fate or destiny. She wasn't saying we were meant to be. She wasn't being romantic. She was being precise, almost mathematical. She said she didn't want to guess what kind of person I was. She wanted to watch, quietly, patiently, until she understood enough to approach correctly. She said she waited to match at the exact moment I was most likely to respond positively. Hearing that felt surreal, like she'd been waiting behind a curtain, watching the rhythm of my daily life until she could step in at the right beat. We talked for another half hour, and she kept revealing bits and pieces. How she tested different times, how she noticed when I scrolled too fast, how she interpreted tiny changes in timing. She said she wasn't obsessed, she was curious. She said patterns were comforting. She said I had a pattern that made sense to her. When I finally told her I needed to head out, she nodded in this soft, knowing way, like she already predicted the moment I would say that. She didn't seem disappointed, just thoughtful. She closed her notebook gently, tucked it away, and told me she hoped the timing felt right for me too. Walking home after that felt unreal, like the sidewalk had shifted angles slightly, like the world was the same but my perception wasn't. I kept hearing her voice in my head saying, inevitable, and the idea of someone waiting for me like I was the last piece in a clock they'd been building made the whole afternoon feel heavier than it should have. Now, whenever I open any app, even for 1 second, I wonder how much of me can be measured without me noticing. I spent most of the morning pacing around my room for no reason, scrolling on my phone until my thumb got tired, then lying on my bed staring at the ceiling just to see if doing nothing would magically reboot me. It didn't. Then my phone buzzed, and I matched with Dids. I didn't know what to think of him from the profile alone. His pictures were all over the place in style. One photo of him standing next to a bridge at sunset, one where he looked like he had just woken up and didn't care about angles at all. One older photo of him at some festival wearing a hoodie that looked too big for him, and another where he was sitting on the floor surrounded by boxes like he was moving in or moving out. He didn't smile much in his pictures, but he didn't look unfriendly either, just neutral, like a guy who existed in the middle lane of life. His bio wasn't long. It said he liked collecting measurements and quiet company. I didn't think too deeply about it, because people write weird stuff in bios all the time. At worst, I figured he was into building furniture or something like that. We exchanged a few messages, nothing intense, and he asked if I wanted to meet at his little bubble tea shop near the bus station. I've been there before. The chairs were always too small for some reason, but the drinks were cheap. Mine usually cost around $6, and a whole place had this laid-back vibe of people who didn't want to be home yet, but also didn't want to be anywhere crowded. I was still in my blank mental zone, so I said yes. The sky was this pale blue-gray color when I walked there, like it wanted to be cloudy but forgot how. I passed a couple walking their dog, a kid on a scooter, someone dragging a suitcase even though the bus station wasn't that close. I didn't think about much, just kept putting one foot in front of the other. When I walked inside the bubble tea shop, Dit was already there. He sat at a corner table facing the door, which made it easy for him to see me walk in. He raised his hand halfway, not fully waving, more like confirming my arrival. He didn't smile, but he didn't seem cold either, just observant. I ordered my usual drink and sat across from him. He asked how my day was and listened without interrupting, nodding a few times in a slow, steady way. He talked softly, not shyly, just like someone who preferred not to waste volume. Everything about him felt controlled, but not forced. But then he did something that shifted the entire energy of the room. He reached into his bag and took out a measuring tape. Not a tiny one. A full-size measuring tape like the kind a construction worker might use, the yellow type that snaps back aggressively if you let go too fast. He set it on the table gently, like he had brought exactly the right tool for whatever moment was about to happen. My brain didn't even know how to respond. I stared at it, then at him, then at it again. He didn't explain it right away, which somehow made it even stranger. He just kept talking about how he liked the lighting in the shop, how we came here sometimes to think, how the chairs were always mismatched. Meanwhile, the measuring tape sat between us like a silent co-host ready to chime in. Finally, after what felt like too long, he leaned down and picked it up again. Then he stood. I didn't know what he was about to do, so I stayed seated, trying to pretend my confusion wasn't showing on my face. He walked around the table slowly, stopping behind the chair I was sitting in. Then he measured the chair. Not the table. Not the space between us. The chair. The one I was sitting in. He measured the height of the backrest first, pulling the tape upward so it made that metallic clicking sound. Then he measured the width of the seat, stretching the tape across from left to right with surprising precision. Then he measured the space between the seat and the floor. He wrote down the numbers in a small notebook, jotting them quickly like he was afraid they would evaporate if he didn't get them down in time. I sat perfectly still, partly because I didn't know if moving would ruin his measurements, and partly because I was too stunned to do anything else. After writing down the final number, he walked back to his seat, sat down quietly, and closed his notebook with a soft snap. Then he explained it. He said he needed to know my preferred confinement range. I blinked. I didn't know if he meant physical comfort or something deeper or something I wasn't prepared to unpack. He didn't elaborate right away. He let the phrase sit between us like it was supposed to make perfect sense. Eventually, he leaned forward and clarified. He said he liked to study how people behave within certain spaces. He said everyone has a subconscious comfort boundary that reveals itself in the size of the space they choose when sitting. He said the chair I picked told him more about my personality than anything I'd said so far. He said people who choose wider chairs need freedom. People who choose narrow chairs want structure. People who choose chairs with armrests crave security. People who choose chairs without armrests trust their surroundings more. He said my choice told him I wanted to find edges, but not restriction. He said the measurements helped him confirm that. I didn't even know how to begin responding to that. The weird part was that he wasn't creepy about it. He wasn't smiling strangely or staring too hard. He spoke like someone giving a lecture on something they genuinely found fascinating. There was no malice, no manipulative undertone, just curiosity, intense curiosity. He explained that he sometimes measured spaces people sat in on his dates because it helped him understand how they navigated physical boundaries. He said he didn't touch the person, he touched the chair. He said the dimensions gave him insight into how they viewed comfort, control, and vulnerability. I asked him how many people he had done this with. He said, enough to trust the data. Data. That word always hits differently when someone applies it to your existence without asking. We kept talking for a while after that, surprisingly without awkwardness. He didn't measure anything else. He didn't pull out more tools. He just drank his bubble tea and asked me thoughtful questions about my week, my classes, my interests. The measuring moment hung in the air, but it didn't ruin the mood. It just sat there, like an extra detail in a story that shouldn't have it but somehow does. When I eventually told him I had to head home, he nodded calmly. He didn't try to walk me out. He didn't ask for a hug. He didn't act disappointed. He just wrote one last note in his notebook, closed it, and said he appreciated the clarity of the measurements. Clarity of the measurements. I didn't know whether I'd passed or failed some invisible exam. Walking home, I kept replaying the moment he stretched a tape across the seat beneath me. The metallic sound, the quick scribbling in the notebook, his gentle nodding when he got the dad he wanted. Now, whenever I sit in any chair, at home, in class, in a cafe, I catch myself wondering, what would Dids think of this one? This day wasn't one of those foggy, half-empty days or one of those overly chaotic ones. It was the kind of day that feels too normal, almost suspiciously normal. The sky looked fake summer blue, even though it wasn't summer. The air had that clean feeling after rain, even though it hadn't rained, and everything around me just felt steady, like the universe was smoothing itself out for no reason. I wasn't stressed. I wasn't tired. I wasn't bored. I was just coasting. That's the mood I was in when I matched with Lily. Her profile was bright, literally bright. Every picture had sunlight blasting across her face or catching in her hair like she had a personal spotlight following her around. She had photos of hiking trails, at a rooftop brunch, standing in a garden holding a huge sunflower, and one selfie taken near a window where her eyes looked lighter than they probably were. Her vibe was cheerful but not loud. She didn't look like a quirky chaos energy person. She looked like the type who woke up early on weekends because she actually wanted to. Her bio mentioned that she was good at noticing quiet things. I didn't think too hard about what that meant, but looking back, maybe I should have. She messaged me asking if I wanted to meet at this small park near the river. I'd been there before. It wasn't crowded, and the benches weren't uncomfortable, and the air always smelled cleaner near the water for some reason. I said yes because staying home felt pointless, and the day was too calm to waste. The walk there was easy. The river made soft sounds against the rocks. The wind nudged the leaves around, but not enough to make a mess, and people were scattered around the park, reading, playing with dogs, walking slowly like they didn't have anywhere important to be. Everything felt balanced. Lily was sitting on a wooden bench near the railing overlooking the water. She stood up when she saw me brushing her hands against her jeans like she'd been waiting awkwardly even though her face didn't show any nerves. She smiled, and it was a kind of smile that felt sincere, not rehearsed. We talked for a few minutes about normal stuff. How weird the weather was, how the river looked clearer that day than usual, how the park always had that slightly muddy smell no matter how dry it was outside. She asked if I'd ever been to the little ice cream cart nearby. I said yeah, once, and she said we could grab something later if the line wasn't awful. Everything was comfortable. Then she did something that shifted the entire atmosphere in a way I didn't expect at all. She asked me to close my eyes. She didn't phrase it like a flirt. She didn't say it in some intense way. She said it softly, but with purpose. Like she wasn't asking. Like this was part of something she had planned already. I blinked at her, confused, waiting for her to explain. But she didn't elaborate. She just kept her eyes on mine with this patient expression, like she was willing to wait as long as it took. I asked her why. She said she needed to listen to the way I breathe when I don't know I'm observed. I froze a little inside, not dramatically, but enough that my brain had to reboot. I didn't know if she meant it metaphorically or literally. Based on her tone, I was pretty sure she meant literally. She told me the date wouldn't continue until I complied. Not harshly, just matter of fact. Like closing my eyes was step one of something she considered essential. I stood there processing it. The river continued making soft sounds behind us. People walked past, minding their own business. The wind nudged my hair a little. Nothing around us changed. The park remained calm, steady, normal. But the moment wasn't normal. Eventually, because I didn't know what else to do, and I didn't want to escalate the weirdness, I closed my eyes. I didn't shut them super tight or dramatically, just enough to let her think whatever she wanted to hear could actually be heard. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then I heard her step closer. Not right in front of me. Not breathing down my neck, just close enough that I knew she had moved. She didn't touch me. She didn't talk. She didn't even shift her weight. She just listened. Listened to me breathe. My heartbeat sped up automatically because my body reacts to weirdness before my brain does. My breath definitely changed, and I'm sure she could hear it. But I kept my eyes shut because opening them felt like the wrong move, like I would break whatever invisible rule she had set. After a moment, maybe 30 seconds, maybe longer, she stepped back. I heard the wood creak slightly when she sat down again. Then she said I could open my eyes. When I did, she looked strangely peaceful, like she had completed a routine she'd done 100 times before. She told me she always listens to someone's breath before she gets to know them. She said people lie with their words, their posture, their expressions, but not with their breathing. She said breathing reveals whether someone is pretending, hiding, overthinking, or comfortable. She explained that breath patterns tell her who someone really is before they know how to present themselves. Her voice didn't shake. She didn't look embarrassed. She didn't look pleased with herself either. She just looked certain. I sat down next to her because standing felt strange after that. She scooted an inch farther away, not to distance herself, but to reposition like she needed a clearer angle. Her eyes drifted toward the water while she explained more. She said she could guess things like baseline stress, trust levels, openness, and emotional intensity from breath alone. She said the world is too loud for people to notice the quiet parts of each other, but she likes the quiet parts the most. She said my breath told her I was restrained but responsive. I had no idea what that meant. I didn't ask. I didn't want to. We talked about other things after that, surprisingly normal things. Music tastes, classes, the way people mix weird toppings into ice cream. She laughed a couple times. I laughed once or twice. Not because anything was hilarious, but because talking to her felt strangely smooth after the initial weirdness. But even during the normal conversation, she watched my breathing. Not constantly, but enough that I noticed. Every time I exhaled a little too sharply or inhaled too quickly, her eyes flicked toward me like she was noting it down mentally. At one point, she told me she had once predicted when someone was lying based solely on their breath rhythm. She said she could tell when someone was about to end a relationship before they said anything because their breathing changed around her. She said people's lungs were the most honest part of them. And she said all of this without sounding dramatic, just factual. After maybe an hour, I told her I had to head out. She nodded like she already expected the timing of my exit. She didn't reach for a hug or wave dramatically. She just looked at me with this calm, steady expression and said she learned enough for today. Enough. For today. Like she planned to gather more someday. Walking home, I couldn't stop thinking about the moment I closed my eyes. The silence, the closeness, the strange attention she gave to something as automatic as breathing. Now, every time I take a breath, especially around other people, I wonder how much they can hear. Everything around me seemed louder than usual, the cars, the people talking on their phones, even the sound of my shoes on the pavement. My brain felt switched on but not focused, like I was waiting for something to happen, even though I didn't know what. That's the mood I was in when I matched with Adam. His profile didn't look chaotic or mysterious. It looked extremely put together. His pictures were clean, almost too clean, crisp lighting, solid backgrounds, simple outfits. One photo of him sitting on a bench looking off to the side, another of him standing next to a food truck with one hand in his pocket, one where he leaned against a wall like he'd been told to hold still. His smile wasn't big, but it wasn't fake either. He seemed like the type of guy who thought before he spoke, the kind who double-checks everything before doing it. His bio said he tracks things for fun, mostly harmless stuff, which I thought meant workouts or steps or something normal people track. I didn't think to ask. I didn't think there would be anything deeper to it. He suggested meeting at a quiet ramen place near the older part of town. It was the kind of spot where the tables were small, the lighting was dim but not moody, and the menu had just enough choices to stress you out, but not enough to overwhelm you. I liked that place. Their bowls were around $13, which wasn't cheap, but the broth tasted like someone cared. I walked there feeling strangely alert, like my senses had the volume turned up too high. The wind felt colder than it should have. The buildings looked sharper. Even the crosswalk signal seemed too bright. I tried to shake it off, but the feeling lingered. When I walked into the ramen place, Adam was sitting in the back booth, posture straight, hands resting calmly on the table. He gave me a little nod. Not a wave, not a smile, just a nod. It oddly fit him. I slid into the seat across from him. His eyes were very focused, not in a creepy way, more like he was trying to memorize something without staring. The server dropped off menus, and we talked about normal things at first: traffic, weather, random updates from our days. His voice was steady, and he spoke like he was trying to articulate everything perfectly. Then the server took our orders, and Adam reached into his backpack. The moment he did that, I felt something shift. It wasn't dramatic, just a small shift in the air, like the background music dipped for a second. He pulled out a manila folder. Yeah, a full manila folder, like something from a school project or an office desk. He placed it on the table gently, tapping the edge twice with his finger like he was marking the moment. Then he opened it. Inside was a printed calendar. A printed calendar. He turned it toward me, pushing it across the table until it sat directly in front of my hands. I thought it was maybe a planner or a schedule he needed to show me for some random reason. But then I looked closer, and that's when my stomach tightened in this slow, confused way. It wasn't a normal calendar. It was a calendar of my posts. Every single day I had posted anything online over the last year was marked with a small dot. Not the content, just the activity. Red dots for heavy posting days, blue dots for moderate ones, green dots for quiet days, and blank spaces for days I posted nothing. The entire thing was filled with color-coded dots like a heat map of my digital existence. I stared at it in silence. It didn't feel threatening. It felt unreal. Like someone took something I never thought about and turned it into evidence for something. I couldn't tell what yet. Then he said it. He said he had been tracking my posting activity for pattern identification. He said it casually, like it was normal, like he was telling me he tracked the weather or the sleep cycle. I asked him why, slowly because I genuinely didn't know what tone to use, and he shrugged lightly, as if the answer was obvious. He said online silence reveals more than online noise. He slid his finger across the calendar, stopping at 2 blank spaces near the end of a month. 2 days where I hadn't posted anything at all. He tapped them gently. Then he asked, "Why were you completely silent on these 2 days? It was unacceptable consistency-wise." My brain short-circuited for a moment. Unacceptable. Consistency-wise. It wasn't that he sounded angry. He didn't. It was that he sounded disappointed. Like I forgot a homework assignment that he thought I was capable of completing. Like he had expectations he wasn't even supposed to have in the first place. I tried to remember what I was doing on those days. I couldn't. Most people don't memorize which exact days they don't post. But Adam clearly did. He leaned back and crossed his arms, the calendar still open between us. He said he wasn't judging me, just classifying deviations. He said consistency was an integrity marker, and sudden silence often pointed to emotional instability or hidden stress. Hidden stress. He said he wasn't asking to pry, just to clarify, because he needed to know whether the silence was intentional or reactive. He told me he read silence as a data point, not a flaw. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to respond to someone treating my online absence like a diagnostic code. My mind was racing, but the restaurant felt unusually calm. Quiet music, clinking bowls, low chatter from other tables, like the world didn't realize something strange was happening. He pointed out other patterns he'd marked in the calendar. Days I posted multiple things. Weeks where I posted nothing but random jokes. Months where I posted consistently and then dropped off. He said he used the patterns to estimate how predictable my emotional rhythm was. He said my emotions weren't unpredictable. They were just compressed into irregular bursts. I swear his tone never changed. He said everything neutrally, like he was reading a weather report. When the ramen arrived, he paused the conversation completely, like he had a rule about not mixing analysis with eating. We sat there eating quietly, and the whole time the calendar sat between us like a silent witness. After a few minutes, he wiped his mouth with a napkin and calmly resumed explaining. He said the 2 silent days bothered him because they didn't align with my baseline. He said he predicted I would post lightly on those days, and when I didn't, it disrupted the entire trend. He said he couldn't build an accurate model without knowing why. A model. Of me. I finished my ramen even though I barely tasted it. My brain was stuck somewhere between confusion and disbelief. None of this felt malicious. None of it felt like he was trying to dominate anything. It felt like he genuinely, sincerely believed tracking my posts made sense. I told him I didn't remember what I was doing on those days. He nodded thoughtful, like he predicted I'd say that. He pulled out a small notepad and wrote something down, probably my answer. Then he said if I ever remembered, I could message him. He said the explanation mattered more than the silence itself. He said silence always means something. When the bill came, he paid without asking, sliding $26 onto the tray. He stacked the dishes neatly, too neatly, and placed the calendar back into the folder like it was fragile. As we stood up, he thanked me for my time like he had just completed a research interview. He didn't hug me or linger or walk me out. He just nodded and left the restaurant with that same steady, collecting data energy. Walking home, I kept replaying the moment he tapped those 2 silent days. The way he treated them like missing puzzle pieces. The way he waited for my explanation. The way he acted like silence needed justification. Now, whenever I don't post for a day, even by accident, I catch myself wondering who might be tracking it. I'm starting this one with a completely different energy because the day it happened didn't feel tense or foggy or over-alert. It felt dull. Not peaceful dull. Stagnant dull. The kind where the hours drag like they're stuck in molasses and the air feels heavier than it should. I had woken up early for no reason, sat on the edge of my bed with my blanket still wrapped around my shoulders, and stared at the floor like my brain forgot how to boot up. Even my phone felt heavier in my hand when I picked it up. I wasn't in a bad mood. I was just a blank screen. So when I matched with Michelle, it felt like something actually broke through the static. Her profile was warm. She had that kind of face that made you instantly assume she was friendly, wide smile, gentle eyes, soft lighting in every photo. She took pictures in parks, in cafes, outside bookstores. Nothing dramatic, nothing posed like a model trying too hard. She had a picture with a dog she said wasn't hers, but that she loved like it was. Her vibe was comforting in a way I didn't expect. She looked like someone who used exclamation marks a lot, but still somehow wasn't annoying. Her bio said she liked getting ready for things before they happen, which sounded like normal over-preparedness. The kind of line you don't question. She messaged me first. It wasn't long or flirty or anything special. Just a casual, I'm near the plaza, want to walk around. Normally, I might have overthought it, but the day was so lifeless that the idea of doing anything at all sounded like relief. So I said yes. The plaza wasn't far from where I lived, just a 10-minute walk past a pharmacy and a tiny bakery that always smelled like vanilla, even if they weren't baking anything. The air outside felt thick, but not humid, just stale. The sidewalks were busy but not loud, filled with people who all looked stuck in their own routines. When I arrived, Michelle was standing near the fountain in the center, holding a drink that looked like blended fruit and sunshine. She waved at me with this energetic little bounce, like she had been genuinely excited to see me. We started walking, not toward anything specific, just around the plaza. She talked quickly, but not in a nervous way, more like she had plenty to say and didn't feel the need to censor any of it. She told me about her morning, about her friend who got a new cat, about a podcast she'd been reading. She had this natural flow to her words, smooth and familiar. Everything felt normal. Until it didn't. We stopped near a street vendor selling bracelets and snacks. Michelle was mid-sentence about something. I can't even remember what when she casually added, in the exact same tone that she had already told her friends I moved to her neighborhood. She didn't pause. She didn't correct herself. She didn't soften the phrasing. She just kept walking forward like she hadn't said anything insane. My brain took a second to catch up. I thought maybe she was joking or referencing something I missed. but she kept talking like it was the most regular thing in the world. I had to step in front of her a little just to make her slow down. I asked her what she meant. She blinked at me with the most innocent confusion, like she couldn't believe I didn't already know. Then she explained, calmly, fully confident in every word. She told her friends I moved into her neighborhood. Not that I might. Not that I was thinking about it. Not that I was considering it. That I did. A full statement of fact that wasn't a fact at all. I stared at her, waiting for her to laugh or call it a joke, but she didn't even crack a smile. She said she told them because she didn't want them to be emotionally caught off guard. She said new people entering a friend circle can be startling, and she wanted them to adjust early. Adjust. Early. She said she wanted to prepare them emotionally in advance so no one felt overwhelmed later. She didn't apologize. She didn't seem embarrassed. She wasn't shy about it. She spoke like she had been thoughtful and considerate, like this was the reasonable thing to do. I asked why she didn't just wait until anything real happened between us before telling anyone anything. She shrugged lightly and said waiting creates emotional chaos. Emotional chaos. Her tone didn't waver even once. She said people handle new connections better when they think they already know the direction things are going. She said telling them early relaxes the future before it arrives. She said she didn't want them feeling blindsided if we ever ended up actually living near each other or spending time in her area. I pointed out that we had known each other for about an hour. She nodded with a bright expression, like this proved her point. She said early preparation is always better than late preparation. She said she didn't even tell them everything, only that someone new had moved close by and they should get used to the idea. Get used to the idea. She said it like I was a piece of furniture being shipped to her house. Michelle kept walking again, explaining things in this steady, upbeat tone like she was describing something cute instead of something bizarre. She told me how her friends responded. One sent a thumbs up emoji, another asked what street, and another shrugged and said, cool. She seemed proud of how smoothly they accepted the imaginary news. I didn't know whether to feel flattered or freaked out. Her calm certainty made it worse. She didn't seem like she was lying. She didn't seem like she was exaggerating. She genuinely believed preemptive emotional preparation was helpful. We sat down at one of the plaza benches. She kept talking about how future dynamics work better when everyone has time to adjust before the real changes happen. She said honesty can be destabilizing if delivered without warning. She said this method had worked for her before. I asked if she always did that, tell people something about someone before it's true. She said yes, and she said it proudly. She said she sometimes tells her family that she has a new friend a few weeks before she actually becomes friends with someone, so they're mentally ready. She said she once told her roommate someone was going to borrow their pan weeks before she even asked. She said she wasn't psychic. She just liked making transitions easier. Transitions. She made it sound like relationships were train schedules, and she was updating everyone on the incoming station. She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone, showing me a message thread with her best friend. Right there, highlighted in blue, was the message. He moved into my neighborhood. You'll probably see him around soon. Exclamation mark and all. Seeing it written out made the whole thing real in a heavier way. My name wasn't in the message, but the implications sat between us like a third person. She seemed so pleased with herself, like she'd accomplished something thoughtful. I didn't know what to say without sounding rude, so I asked what she expected to happen now that she told him that. She said nothing specific. She said she just wanted the emotional groundwork set. She said if things went well, everything would feel natural. And if things didn't go well, she'd simply tell her friends we never crossed paths. She said it casually, like rewriting reality was a normal part of maintaining friendships. We walked for a bit after that, both quieter. She still smiled a lot, still talked softly, still pointed out random little things like flowers and store signs. But I couldn't stop thinking about how her friends were now imagining me somewhere on her street, even though I had never been there in my life. When I finally said I had to go, she hugged me lightly and said she was glad everything went smoothly. Smoothly, like she planned for other outcomes, like this was step one of something bigger. Walking home, I kept thinking about the idea of emotional preparation, how she acted like the truth didn't matter as long as everyone felt warmed up for it. It wasn't malicious. It wasn't obsessive. It was just her logic. But now, every time I go near a new neighborhood, I catch myself wondering if someone already told their friends I live there. I'm starting this one with a different kind of tone because the day felt strangely flat, like someone pressed the mute button on everything around me. It wasn't boring, and it wasn't stressful. It was that in-between state where the world feels paused even though it's still moving. I woke up way earlier than I planned, stared at my phone without unlocking it, sat at the edge of my bed with my hands in my hoodie pocket, and just existed for a while. No motivation, no urgency, just sitting in that weird, quiet space in my own head. Then Kane matched with me. His profile didn't look like trouble. If anything, he looked like the kind of guy who stands in the background at social events and somehow still looks put together. His photos were simple, one in a jacket leaning on a railing, one at the beach holding a drink, one of him sitting on some stone steps, and a close-up mirror selfie that was surprisingly normal for a mirror selfie. He didn't try to look mysterious, but he also didn't try to be funny or loud. His vibe was steady, maybe slightly intense, but nothing that screamed watch out. His bio just said he liked structure and clear choices, which at the time sounded like some organized person thing. I didn't think it meant anything deeper. He messaged me asking if I wanted to meet at a diner on the edge of the shopping district. I'd been there a few times. Everything on the menu looked like it was from a different decade, and the chairs squeaked if you breathed too hard, but the place had charm. The usual order cost around $10, nothing too crazy. The walk there gave me something to do, so I agreed. The sky was this sharp gray color that made every building look like it had an outline drawn around it. The air was crisp without being cold. People moved in that slow, late afternoon rhythm, not rushing anywhere, not dragging their feet either. Everything felt suspended. When I got to the diner, Kane was already inside, sitting in a booth near the back with a glass of water in front of him. He wasn't on his phone. He wasn't fidgeting. He just sat there with his hands folded neatly like he was waiting for a meeting to start. He nodded when he saw me and gestured toward the seat across from him. We talked for a bit. Basic stuff, nothing deep. Work, classes, the weather, how much the diner smelled like syrup even when no one was eating pancakes. His voice was calm but very precise, like someone who didn't waste words. He asked questions and listened carefully, always keeping eye contact but not in a creepy way. Everything was normal until the moment he took out his phone. He didn't pick it up to check messages or look at the time. He flipped it over slowly, placed it face up between us, and slid it closer to the middle of the table. On the screen was a countdown. A literal countdown timer, set to my name. Right above the numbers, hours, minutes, seconds, was my name in a neat label, the kind you'd give a file on a computer, and the numbers were ticking down, calmly, steadily, 1 second at a time. I stared at it, unsure what I was looking at. I thought it was some kind of joke at first, but there was nothing funny about the expression on his face. He looked expectant, not excited, not anxious, just waiting. I asked him what it was. He said it was the time I had left to make a correct decision. He said it so casually that my brain glitched for a full second. He explained it like he was talking about a restaurant reservation or a deadline for an assignment. He said he set the timer before leaving his house. He said he calculated the duration based on what he believed would be an appropriate window. I asked appropriate for what? He said appropriate for choosing. Choosing what? He looked at me like the answer should have been obvious. He said the countdown represented how long he gave himself, and me, to determine whether the date was heading in a viable direction. He said people waste too much time drifting, wandering, hovering between options. He said decisions are cleaner when you attach a timeline to them. He said timelines force honesty. I didn't know whether to laugh or get up and leave. The calmness in his voice didn't match the intensity of what he was saying. He wasn't threatening me. He wasn't demanding anything. He wasn't telling me what choice I was supposed to make. He just expected one, within the timer. He told me he didn't want ambiguity. He said the timer helped him avoid emotional inefficiency. Emotional inefficiency. Like feelings were a spreadsheet he needed to balance. He tapped the screen lightly with his fingertip, not aggressively, just enough to draw attention to the seconds ticking away. The numbers kept dropping, steady and merciless. He didn't explain what would happen when it hit 0. He didn't say there would be consequences. It was just a measure, a structure he believed in. He told me that if a choice takes too long, it's usually the wrong one. He said he didn't believe in dragging things out. If something was going to work, he thought you could tell early. And if it wasn't, delaying only made everything worse. He said this like he had learned it the hard way. Then he leaned back and let the timer run, watching me with that same steady gaze. The strangest part was that he didn't seem controlling. He didn't seem desperate. He didn't try to steer the conversation or push me emotionally. He just watched the timer like it was a natural part of the date. We kept talking after that, well, trying to, but everything I said felt weirdly magnified by the ticking numbers. Every joke, every pause, every sip of my drink felt like it got funneled into some invisible grading system behind his eyes. It didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a test. He asked me if the timer made me uncomfortable. I was honest. I said yes. He nodded as if he expected that. He said discomfort was informative. He said discomfort reveals how people handle external pressure. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't pleased with himself. He was just taking notes mentally. At one point, I tried to lean back and take a breath, and he glanced at the timer again like he was checking how my reaction lined up with his predictions. The seconds continued falling, steady, precise, hypnotic in a way I really didn't want them to be. We finished our drinks. Mine cost $4, his cost $3, and he folded his hands again. The timer kept decreasing. When the countdown reached the final few minutes, he finally spoke again. His voice was calm, almost gentle. He said the purpose of the timer wasn't to rush me. It was to reveal whether I made decisions under pressure or avoided them. He said avoidance was the worst outcome. He said silence was worse than saying no. When the timer hit 0, nothing dramatic happened. His phone didn't buzz. He didn't sit up straighter. He didn't make any sudden movements. He just calmly tapped the screen, stopping it from looping. Then he turned off the display and slid the phone back into his pocket. He said he had his answer. I didn't know if that was supposed to be good or bad. He didn't clarify. He didn't explain what conclusion he reached. He just stood up, thanked me for meeting him, and said he appreciated the clarity. Clarity. The word left a weird taste in my head. I walked out of the diner feeling like I'd stepped out of some psychological experiment. Cars passed normally. People walked normally. The world went on, indifferent. But I kept hearing the ticking in the back of my mind like a phantom echo. Now, whenever someone pauses before making a decision, even for something tiny, I catch myself imagining a timer counting down somewhere behind them.